few years ago, my husband and I turned onto the minimalist lifestyle. That is, if you don't know, retain a base minimum of belongings and don't over-encumber yourself or your home with excessive amounts of stuff. We were knick-knack types, collectors of whatever we thought was cool or even unique. Each windowsill in our house had different charms or minerals on display. No surface went undecorated the entire time that we were together, up until the introduction of this whole minimalism idea. Once we learned about it, we started selling all kinds of stuff. Facebook Marketplace became a passive form of income for us, but we still weren't fully satisfied. After the first year, all the knickknacks and small collections were gone, but we still felt like our house had way too much stuff. I sold a bunch of my crafts gear that I wasn't using anymore. My husband sold off tools and outdoor gear that he never used. We started to plan out what we were going to do with all the money that we saved as well. It was only like $500, but at the rate we were going, it would turn into a nice little chunk of change, more than enough to take some kind of nice vacation. We wanted to empty out even more of our belongings, to see if we can get the money pile up to $1,000. I was starting to sell some of my collector items, like antique chinaware, paintings, and things I largely considered just extra. My husband was on a mission to move his big 11-piece Pearl drum kit. He played a bit in college. It was just one jam band that maybe had a half a dozen shows throughout his life. But for some reason, he always held on to that drum set. In the back of his mind, he always wanted to come back to it. But now, 10 years had gone by, and he hadn't so much as even picked up a stick during that whole hiatus. He realized that the drum kit was really just a dream, and was something that needed to go. We came up with a fair price and added it to our ever-evolving Facebook Marketplace offering. It was the highest mark item at the time, and was going to make more than double the amount of savings that we accumulated. We started to get some bites, but they were mostly just offers that my husband wasn't interested in entertaining. People wanted to make trades or payments, or just make lowball offers in general. My husband wasn't having it, stuck firm on the price. He knew what that kit was worth, and he'd already moved the price down significantly. The price was right. Now we just needed to wait for the right buyer. A week or so later, I was home alone. I had the day off. I was going through my normal morning routines when I saw that I had a notification. Someone had commented on the post about the drum set. He said it looked great, it had an amazing price, and would love to come take a look at it. He ended his comment by asking if he could send us a DM, to which I replied yes. I finished up what I was doing, the laundry or the dishes, something like that, then called my husband Mitchell. "Hey, someone commented on your drum set," I said. "Does he seem serious?" he asked. "I can't tell yet, he just commented on it. But he's the most serious person so far. He wants to come take a look at it. What time are you going to be home?" I don't know," Mitchell stammered through the phone. He was a site manager, and they were putting up a new building. His hours during this project could vary. "I'm not really sure. So if he's wanting to see it this morning or even afternoon, and you feel comfortable, go ahead and let him come by and take a look at it. The price is firm though. This is just purely a quality check of the instrument," he explained very clearly. "Sure, sounds good. Anything special I should mention?" "That it's been collecting dust for 10 years and may as well be brand new. I gotta go though. I love you." "I love you too," I said, and then hung up. That was pretty much all I wanted to know. Make sure he was okay with the guy coming to look at it while he wasn't here, and if there was anything special that I should say. Other than that, we lived close to our neighbors, and I knew them pretty well. Also, had a decent amount of security within the house, a camera, a gun, that kind of thing. Robbery would be risky for anyone coming into our house, or at least, so I thought. I hit the guy back on the post and told him that we were good to go, to which he followed up with a DM. He said his name was Ryan and that he was very excited about finding such a killer deal. I gave him a little background info on the drum set, and that I would be home all day if he wanted to swing by and take a look at it. Ryan said he had some other things going on, but could stop by around 1 p.m. That was just a few hours off and it suited me perfectly. I gave him our address. I told him to hit me back on Messenger if anything changes, or if he had any trouble finding the house. With that, he signed off, and I resumed whatever I was doing. I actually looked up a YouTube video and decided that I was going to clean the drum set, and I wanted to know the best and safest way to do so. It really had collected a healthy layer of dust. I wanted it looking good for whenever this guy came around. If Mitchell came home and I had the thing sold, boy, he'd be happy. After I got it dusted and shined up, I went and took a shower. I still had plenty of time before Ryan was supposed to show up, so I figured I'd get some more of my own chores done before I did the showing. I hopped out and started drying off, and then I just got this weird feeling. I couldn't place it at first, but it was like there was something that I didn't recognize beyond the bathroom window. We had one of those weird fog glass windows, so you could just see blurs and colors. No real definition through the glass. But there was something bright red in our driveway. At first, I thought it was maybe a neighbor or a delivery driver. I snuck into the bedroom and got dressed, as I quietly listened for anything weird. Footsteps around the side of the house, or maybe somebody already inside. I really didn't know what to expect, so I kept my phone handy just in case. I snuck out to the kitchen and looked out the window. There was a red hatchback parked in the driveway right behind my car. Okay, not the weirdest thing, but definitely unusual. Just as I'm getting ready to put on my sandals and ask the neighbors if they know anything, I see something. There's a man outside the living room window, essentially standing in the front yard, nowhere near his car. I keep an eye on him, and I don't really panic at first because he looks like, I'm not sure, maybe he's confused, lost. He looked like a little kid. It's really hard to describe. Definitely a full-grown man skulking around my property though, but the look in his eyes was that of a child. It's weird. Still, I pulled up my phone and had my husband's number ready to dial. This guy was picking around our garden, mostly the herb patch where we grew a bunch of stuff in little squares near the front of the house. He touched just about everything and started helping himself to links of rosemary and thyme, handfuls of basil leaves, mint, even oregano. When he had this nice little stash, he took it back to his car and tucked it inside the console. I figured he was going to hop in the car and leave, but to my surprise, he went back to the area near the window and started fiddling with the hose. He got it unwrapped from the holder and turned the knob and then started watering the herb garden. He gave it a few spurts, then put the nozzle in his mouth and started drinking from it. He did this for like 10 minutes, no joke. After he was satisfied, he made sure the hose was untangled, then started walking over to his car. I kid you not, this man washed his entire hatchback in my driveway with that hose, with my own water. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but I was so perplexed with what I was watching, I didn't even bother to stop him. This guy was clearly crazy, or maybe he thought he was at a different house, but either way, it was my entertainment for that afternoon. When he was done rinsing his car and having a sip, he walked the hose back over and wrapped it up on the holder, then killed the water just as he found it. Okay, some semblance of normalcy, I guess. I'll never forget watching him pull his phone out and then putz around the front yard, Facebooking or whatever the hell he was doing, like he was just at his own house. Now, I really thought this was a case of mistaken address. He must be from out of town. Thought he was at his sister's house or something. Maybe he knocked while I was in the shower and I didn't answer. Now he was just waiting around. But then it happened. He put the phone to his ear. Then my phone started vibrating. I was receiving a Facebook message call from Ryan, the guy who was supposed to come over in an hour or two. He was the weirdo looting my garden and helping himself to my hose. I shook my head and answered. "Hello?" I said. "Hello," he said. Super weird start. "Is everything good? We still on for later?" I asked, staring right at the back of the guy's head. Yeah, I was actually going to ask, could we move up our meeting? A bunch of stuff came up later and it'd be easier for me to come take a look rather than later." "Sure. How about noon?" I asked, checking the clock. That was in 20 minutes. "Perfect," he said, throwing his hands in the air. "I'll be there in a bit. Thank you so much." And then we both hung up. It was the weirdest thing watching this guy lie, then react to his own lies. I was really put off by the whole thing and called my husband right away. I was not very pleased when he didn't answer the first, second, or third time that I tried to call his phone. They were in the middle of putting up these massive steel warehouse buildings, and the phone service was really bad beneath all that metal paneling. Whatever the case, I don't like how everything was progressing. I'm looking down at my phone, deciding what to do, if I should call the police, when I hear him knock, I look up and there he is, peeking through the glass by the door. He gives me this creepy little wave. This was the exact kind of nightmare that I envisioned, with my husband not being home. I stood there like a deer in headlights while Ryan continued knocking on the door. To my horror, he turned the knob and just pushed it open. Mitchell hadn't locked it behind him when he left this morning for work. I couldn't believe what I just let happen, and that I failed to make any kind of call to the outside for help. "Hi," he said in a slow, creepy voice. "Are you Erica?" "Yes," I said, trying not to sound shaky or scared. "Are you Ryan?" "Yeah, sorry, I've been knocking for a little while. Didn't mean to freak you out or anything," he explained. "Yeah, it's just that we agreed to meet later at like 2 p.m. I wasn't expecting you this early, or to be poking around my garden," I said. A slow smile split across his face. "Oh yeah, you saw that? Yes, I couldn't help myself," was all he said. That was it. No other explanation about showing up early or lurking around my property. I was becoming sick at this point. "So, can I see that drum set? I have cash." That brought me back to the moment. I said, "Okay, it's right back here. Maybe this all is just a fluke. This guy is excited to get the kit for such a steal." I led him inside the rec room, and the guy started going off about how pristine it was. Loved the vintage look. Loved how preserved it was. All that good stuff. This guy was on his hands and knees inspecting every little hinge on the frame. Then he starts telling me about the old band that he used to play in, how they went by the wayside after the frontman and songwriter got locked up for selling drugs. He was just a fill-in guy for a while, taking gigs as a sub for other bands on tour, or local acts around town who just needed him for one night. Got to learn a lot about genres and what he liked to play during those years. And suddenly, I realized this guy had been talking to me for like 40 minutes, going on and on and on about his whole life story. He hadn't so much as turned an eye on the drums since he started talking, and now it was just all about him. I was getting that weird vibe again. I didn't know what to do. Ryan was making himself at home, walking from room to room, giving himself his own little tour, and complimenting everything that he found. I couldn't tell if this guy was just high or crazy. Either way, he would continuously kept giving me these creepy little glances over his shoulder. "Look, I have a lot to do," I finally said. "Do you want to buy the drum set? That's what you're here for, right?" Yes, he said. "The drum set. It's perfect. I want it." He pulled a bunch of money out of his pockets, disorganized bills, crumbled and stuffed at random. He counted out the amount that he needed and kept asking me over and over and over again what the amount was. It was a nice round number. I really couldn't figure out why he needed me to repeat it so many times. He gave me the money and then started breaking the kit down, and then schlucking it out to his car. He talked the entire time, like he never took a breath, continually talking about what he was going to do with his drums and the plans for his weekend. It was like this guy thought he knew me or something. After he got the drums loaded up, he actually tried to come back in our house, and thank God my husband got home around this time. Ryan's entire demeanor changed the second Mitchell's truck rolled into the driveway, like he'd been caught out or something. He went from looking like a curious kid to menacing and troubled. He didn't speak to my husband at all, just simply said thanks, climbed into his car, and left. I never heard from Ryan again, and thankfully haven't seen him either. The whole scenario was probably nothing, but I can't shake the feeling that I dodged something scary that afternoon. In hindsight, it just seemed like he was probing, seeing how far he could take the situation before I would start to react. I misjudged everything from start to finish and felt like a dummy for putting myself in danger. I guess if you're gonna make online sales, that's just the name of the game.
I used Facebook Marketplace to try to sell my car. I had an old SUV that I was trying to see what I could get for. I had recently gotten a newer vehicle. I knew that my SUV wasn't worth all that much and was just asking $3,000 for it. It ran fine, but had a lot of miles and was older. I took some pictures and then listed it on Facebook Marketplace. Within days, I had some interest in the car. The very first person to contact me about it was a woman named Annie. She told me that she was very interested and would like to come over and take a look at the car. I told her that she could come by any time the next day because I didn't have anything going on. She suggested 8 p.m. and I agreed to it. So the next night, I got the car out of the garage and onto the driveway. Now, I live in a very quiet neighborhood with a little bit more space. My driveway is pretty long, so I put the SUV I was selling about halfway down. At 8 o'clock, a van pulled up in front of the bushes at the end of my front yard. I figured this had to be Annie. Sure enough, a woman got out that resembled the profile picture. She had blonde hair that was decently long and was wearing a black coat. She walked up to me by the car and we shook hands. Then she began looking at the vehicle. After about 5 minutes, she asked if we could go for a test drive, and I agreed. She got in the driver's seat and I got in the passenger's. Then she backed out of the driveway, and I suggested that we should just drive around the neighborhood a little bit. The roads around there were usually very quiet and pretty easy to drive on. So we left and drove around my neighborhood for a little while. The test drive went as expected. Annie asked several basic questions about the car and seemed to be genuinely interested in it. I answered her questions, and I really thought that I might be able to sell the car to her. She drove the car pretty well, and after about 15 minutes, we headed back to my house. When we got there, she pulled back into the driveway and parked the car where it had been. After we got out of the car, she gave the keys back to me and said that she would have to think about it. I understood. I was a little bit disappointed, but buying a car is a big decision, so I really wasn't that let down or anything. I told her to let me know if she wanted it, and then we shook hands again and said bye to each other. Then I went back inside of my house as Annie drove away. After getting back inside of my house, though, almost instantly I heard something. Now, I live alone and don't have any pets, so I didn't know what on earth the noise could have been. Then I heard footsteps coming from inside. They were in the other room, as I was just inside of the living room. It sounded like it was coming from possibly the kitchen, and there was no doubt that somebody else was in my house with me. I called out, asking if anybody was there. Things were just silent. I yelled loudly, asking if anybody was inside my house, and said that I was calling the police if they were. After yelling that, I backed away towards my front door. I could leave the house if somebody was in here and came after me. My heart was racing, and I didn't really know what to do, because clearly somebody else was inside. Then I heard the back door to my house that goes to the patio open up. This was still out of my view, so I couldn't see anything. The door then shut, and I stayed where I was. I wasn't 100% sure that whoever was in the house had actually left. Probably 10 seconds later, as I still stood in the living room by the front door to my house, I heard a noise coming from outside and behind me. It was coming from the driveway, and I looked and saw a man sprinting down my driveway. He was running so fast, plus the sun had just set, so I couldn't get a good description of him. The only thing I could really tell was that he was a grown man in dark clothing. After he sprinted to the end of the driveway, my jaw dropped. I watched him quickly jump into the back seat of a car that had just come to a stop on the side of the road in front of my house. The car was the same van that Annie had been driving. After he got inside, the van violently screeched away. It was only then that I looked around my entire house to make sure that nobody else was there. They were gone, but I had several things stolen from me. Some cash from my bedroom, a watch, my old iPhone that I didn't use anymore, and a couple of other small things. I called the police, and they came out a short time later. I told them everything, but unfortunately, I didn't get the license plate to the van. Annie, if that was even her name, blocked me on Facebook, but I gave what I could to the police. The way the intruder got in the house was my own fault. I had left my garage door open when I was gone, and the door to the house from the garage was unlocked. I felt really stupid for that. But my neighborhood is always very quiet, and my garage is so far back in the driveway, I never felt in danger if it was open. I guess the guy was in Annie's van, and when we left for the test drive, he got out and just walked right in. I learned not to invite anybody that I didn't know to my house after this. From that point forward, when I tried selling my car, I had them meet me at a local business or something. If you use any websites like Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, I would advise you to learn from my mistake and meet in a public location if you have to meet at all. I have a terrible horror story from using Facebook Marketplace. I'm telling you, I will never use it again, and I'm still mad about it. So this happened about 2 years ago. I had this really nice 50-inch TV, which had been the main TV in my living room. However, I got a new one that was 65 inches. The other one was too big for my bedroom, and I already had one in there, so I decided to sell the 50-inch TV. I thought, what better place to sell a television than Facebook Marketplace? So I took a couple of pictures and then listed it. At first, I got nothing. Then somebody lowballed me, and I blocked them for making such an insulting offer. Then somebody reasonable came along. It was a guy named Tim. Tim said that he was interested in buying the TV and asked me if it worked. I told him yes, it works just like new, which it did. He then gave me an offer, and I countered, which he accepted. I was perfectly satisfied with the amount of money that I would be getting. So we arranged a date and time for Tim to come over and buy the TV. When it arrived, he showed up to my house, and I invited him inside. I turned on the TV, showing him that it worked and everything. Then he paid me the cash, and I gave him the television. He carried it out into his car, and then he left. I was happy with the sale that I made. A couple of weeks went by, and then, out of nowhere, I got a message from Tim on Facebook. He said that the TV broke, and he wanted a full refund for it. Now, when I sold it to him, it had worked just fine. It was also 2 weeks since I had made the sale. I was a seller on Facebook Marketplace. I don't offer any kind of a warranty. I told him no. I was pretty confident that whatever happened to the TV, if anything actually happened to it, it was probably Tim's fault. Out of curiosity, I asked him what exactly happened to the TV. Tim claimed that he had no clue and said that it was just broke. He also said that I must have done something to it. He then claimed that he could sue me. I asked to see a picture. Tim sent me a picture of the TV, which had clearly been smashed. It looked like somebody had punched the screen. I asked him if he had punched it, which made him really angry. He asked me if I was going to give him a refund or not. I told him no. I told him that it's been weeks and I'm not required to offer any kind of a warranty. I reminded him how I showed him the TV worked fine just before he bought it. Tim then cursed me out and I blocked him. I couldn't believe he expected me to give him a refund. That very same night, he showed up at my house. Obviously, he knew my address from before, and he banged on my door after getting there. I did not open it for him, and I yelled for him to go away. He shouted back that he was not leaving without his money. He said that he brought the TV with him, and he wanted to return it. I looked out the window, and I saw that he did in fact have the TV with him. I said that he couldn't, and that was that. Tim still wasn't leaving, so I threatened to call the police. Finally, that seemed to get him to go away. But as he was leaving, I watched him walk over to my car in the driveway and throw the TV at my windshield. He then walked away, leaving the TV on the driveway. After he left, I walked out to see if there was any damage to my car. Surprisingly, there wasn't. The windshield held up perfectly. I couldn't say the same for the TV though. It was already broken, but after it fell to the pavement of the driveway, it got even more broken. Luckily though, I never saw Tim or heard from him again after that.
I'm a female, currently 29 and just graduated from grad school in my field of study. I stayed with my parents for a good while after that, but it eventually came to a point where I had to move out and get my own place. My parents and I had enough money saved up since high school and helped me get my first house. The house I got wasn't anything too crazy. It was just a standard one-storied home appropriate for a single person like me. It was basically the size of a trailer home because, let's face it, nothing is affordable in this economy. It took me a good while to settle in, and when I did, I started to get used to the independent lifestyle. It was very hard at first, but as time went on, I started to get the hang of it. After a while, it slowly started to feel like home, and I even made some friends at work who would sometimes come over to keep me company. Now, fast forward to a few weeks later, I'm in my room playing video games on my day off when I go to my fridge for a snack and notice something weird. The pizza I had ordered the other night was already half eaten, which should have been impossible since I had only eaten one slice. In fact, I seem to have been eating up all my food pretty quickly. Now, I eat like a horse, so this was no surprise to me, and I just dismissed it as me eating too much. Obviously, I brushed it off as my dumbass self eating out of control and sort of just went on with my life. But when it started to become blatantly obvious that there was no way I could have been eating all of that, I got suspicious and decided to do something about it. Back in high school, I had gotten these hidden cameras built into the back of an iPhone charger, and I guess I had packed them for some reason. Out of total curiosity, I plug a few into the walls of my kitchen to just see if there was possibly someone in my house. I've heard several stories of people finding out their food was missing only to find squatters in their homes. This concerned me deeply as this was during the winter, so a house was the perfect place for squatters to hide from the cold. Needless to say, I leave them up there and sort of forgot about them for a few days. One day, I had been speaking with a coworker about something when she brought up that her mom's house had recently been robbed. I of course felt sympathy for her, but that was when it reminded me about my food going missing and the cameras I installed. I completely forgot about this and tell her that I was possibly going through a similar situation with a squatter. My coworker is the sort of techie type and recommended I download this app that lets you use the uploaded footage from the cameras to your phone. I did just that, and that night I had recharged my cameras and connected them to my iPad. What I caught on camera was absolutely disturbing. I woke up at around 8 in the morning and immediately checked the footage where I saw something at the hour-and-a-half mark. It was around 2 a.m. and I see my cupboard door open above my sink and someone step out and jump onto the floor. Those who don't know what a cupboard is, it's basically a separate cabinet large enough for storing large items. I never used it as I never really had a reason to, and to be honest, I don't really have any items to store. The person who climbed out was a skinny older looking woman who appeared to be in her late 50s. She immediately goes to the fridge and begins to drink my carton of milk while also eating some of my food from the other night. After eating my food for a good 10 minutes, she climbs onto the counter and back into the cupboard. I couldn't even find the words to react to this. I was beyond shocked and beyond horrified. The fact that my theory was correct, that this person, a stranger, was living in my house was beyond me. I wasted no time and went outside to call the police, not even dreaming of opening the cupboard door. The police showed up very quickly, as my house wasn't too far from the station. They enter my home and open the cupboard door, and lo and behold, there's the woman crouched inside. Almost immediately, she began screaming like a deranged person while cussing at the police as they tried to get her to come down. At one point, one of the officers grabs her arm and full-on pulls her out, where they then handcuff her. All the while, she kept saying how she was my mom and that she lived with me. However, police obviously knew she was full of it and took her away. Now, you might think of me as messed up for this, but I decided to press charges against her. This was likely my worst encounter with a stranger. I ended up having my mom stay with me for a bit after that, as I couldn't stand the paranoia of that woman. I now have cameras all over my home, and I even got a dog for extra protection. Mind you, I'm somewhat allergic to both dogs and cats, so getting one was a really hard decision, but I'll live with it. I'm a 19-year-old female, and this happened just last year in the summer. I live with my mom and sister, and last year we had just bought a new house in the suburbs of LA. We got it for a decent price and moved in right away. With my mom working full-time at a new job, she would oftentimes have my sister and I move everything in. My sister is 15, and while she couldn't do much, she did what she could. Anyway, we got settled in, and after a good month or so, we enjoyed that house for a good while. If I can remember correctly, this happened sometime in July and seriously creeped the hell out of my family and I. I won't bore you with unnecessary details, so I'll just get straight to the point. My friend, who I'll call Emily, had just dropped me off at home one night after attending a concert as a late birthday present. My mom had been at work and my sister was at a friend's house, so that meant I was the only one home. With nothing to really do, I go to my room and throw myself onto the bed while texting Emily a thank you and that I had a fun time. Anyway, I'm on my phone scrolling through Instagram when I hear what sounded like music from inside of my room. It wasn't creepy or anything, but I can make it out to be a Christmas song, specifically an instrumental version of Silent Night. At this point, I'm thinking to myself as to where it could have been coming from, but it was clearly obvious that it was coming from my closet. I get up and walk over to my closet where the music is now louder, and that's when I reach into my clothes. After a good few minutes of searching, I pull out from one of my jackets what appeared to be a fancy musical ornament in the shape of an egg. I've never seen this thing before in my life, and we don't even celebrate Christmas, so I have no idea how this thing got into my closet. Mind you, I had just bought the jacket I had found it in, so that added even more suspicion. It kept playing the Christmas song for another minute before completely stopping, and I'm just here wondering what to do. Out of curiosity, I FaceTime my sister at her friend's house and ask her if she's seen this before. Expectedly, she replied with a no and told me to call Mom and ask her. I do just that, but she doesn't answer as she's still at work, and that's when I look it up online. Apparently, it's supposed to be this ornament egg that plays music when you open it. I tried to see if anyone else could have experienced the same thing, but unfortunately, there were no other incidents. An hour later, my mom came home and I immediately ran up to her and showed her what I had found, asking if she's seen it before. She gives me this weird look and tells me she's never seen it before, and that's when we start to get a little creeped out. If nobody we knew put it in that jacket, then who did? My mom always locks the doors whenever she leaves for work, so we weren't sure who could have possibly done this. Also, we live in a relatively safe area, so the chances of any robbery or break-ins were slim but not impossible. To be safe, we called the police just to make sure. They took a look at the egg to make sure there were no cameras in it and took it in for further inspection, but nothing ever became of it. 2 weeks later, my mom calls me while I'm at a friend's dorm and asks me why I had left the attic door open. In a confused voice, I tell her that I didn't and that maybe my sister did. My sister also denied going up there, and from that point forward, my mom implemented a strict no attic rule. I don't know if the attic door being open was linked to the egg, but I doubt it, to be honest. Nothing has happened since then, but I just hope that nobody came into our house to put it there. I know, not the creepiest story, but this one definitely left us scratching our heads for a while. This story is a bit longer, but this is seriously the creepiest incident I've ever had. Just to note, this isn't the type of story to have you on the edge of your seat. It is, however, a very strange but at the same time cool story. I want to point out that I'm Norwegian, so I apologize if my English is a bit off. For context, I'm a female, currently 31 and living in a new house I had just bought in rural Norway that was built back in the 30s. It's a one-storied home and was perfect for myself. While it might have been rural, I enjoyed me time and enjoyed the fact that I didn't have to deal with any annoying neighbors. One day, I had a friend visit me all the way from another city to spend the day with me. At one point, we're having some of the lunch I made when she asks me if I ever been to the attic in my house. I never even knew this house had an attic, and I asked her how she knew that. She responded by saying that the roof of the house appeared larger and just assumed there had to be one. This was especially interesting as it's rare for houses to have attics in this part of Norway. My friend, being the persuasive person she was, brought up the idea that we should check it out. I, on the other hand, wasn't so stoked, as there's nothing too great about a simple attic. However, she was my friend, and after all, it wasn't a bad idea to at least see it. After looking for the attic door for about 20 minutes, we finally found it and pulled on the rope trying to get it open. When we finally did, the whole thing came flying out with dust forming all over my garage. It was obvious this attic hadn't been used in years, which kind of concerned me to say the least. My friend gets out her iPhone and shines it around the attic, and that's when she stops and tells me that I need to come look at this. She didn't sound scared or worried, however. She more so had that voice that seemed as if she had found something unexpected, and boy, was she right. I climb up the ladder and enter the attic and see what appeared to be some hidden room in the form of a triangle. It was very small compared to the rest of the attic, but right away we started to notice some odd features to it. Upon heading up there, we found what appeared to be some sort of wooden table, a map of West Europe, a doll's shoe, and an old lamp alarm. We both look at each other wondering what the hell this room was for and if there was possibly someone living in my attic. But perhaps the strangest thing we found in there was a sign that translates from Norwegian as, "If you have a bad stomach, then you don't have access." That was probably the creepiest thing we found in there, as we weren't sure what it meant. Other than that, there wasn't much else in there. No food wrappers, no bottles, or any sign of anyone living there for a long time. My friend and I came to the conclusion that this secret room was likely a hiding place for Jews to hide from the Nazis. This would explain the lamp alarm we found, as that would have silently warned them if German soldiers had entered the house. We ended up calling the police, but there really wasn't much they could do about it, and to be honest, I can't blame them. I did end up taking some pictures, but out of respect for whoever was up there, I won't be showing them to the public. I don't know, maybe one day I will, but now is just not the right time. Needless to say, this was definitely an unexpected discovery, and I hope I get more answers one day.
I've been thinking of submitting this story for quite some time. I don't know if it's good enough, but it's honestly the creepiest and scariest moment of my life. So here it goes. I live in Poland in a studio flat. My neighborhood is pretty safe. I've lived here for almost 4 years, and only 1 or 2 bad things have happened. It probably helps that I have municipal police literally downstairs. This happened early this year in January. I was getting ready for bed. I made sure that my door was locked. I'm kind of paranoid about that, so I checked probably like 3 times just to be sure. But this night, I didn't put the key into the lock. I remember this stupid article saying if you do that, it actually helps thieves or something like that. I have a cat, and that'll be important later in the story. I go to sleep, earplugs in my ears because I can't sleep without them. It was 1 or 2 in the morning when I woke up. I then see my 2 neighbors standing right next to my bed. I then freaked out and screamed because how on earth could they get into my apartment? Then the lady says that when she was coming back from work, she had saw my cat on my staircase and she noticed my door was slightly opened. She was scared to come inside by herself, so she went upstairs and got her husband to come with her. Here's the chilling part. I knew that I locked the door. I just knew it. There were no signs of burglary, so how the hell did someone get in? Nothing was missing. Nothing was stolen. I had my laptop on the table and it was still here. I immediately called my landlord and he told me to call the police, so I did. They came in and checked everything. The only other possible way to get inside was through the balcony. But I live on a 2nd story, and from the 1st floor balcony you would need a ladder to get to mine. The police had told me that I was sleepwalking, but when I put away my keys, I had put them in a very specific spot, and they were still there, exactly where I put them. I know that I wasn't sleepwalking, and I know I locked the door. The next day, I had talked to my landlord's wife. She was so unbothered that it made me cry. I was so scared that night that I didn't sleep, and I had to take a day off work because I didn't want to leave the apartment just in case the potential intruder came back and killed my cat. Yeah, I'm that kind of cat mom, if you know what I mean. Back to the story. She, the wife, then tells me that she also had a similar experience when they lived there too. She was reading when the neighbor's dog just came in through the door. And here's the part that made me lose it. She said that the door just sometimes bounces off the hinges and opens itself. How in the world? I mean, can that really happen? And if so, why wasn't I informed about it when I moved in? I don't buy it, honestly. But I made them check the door a few days later, and they said everything was fine. However, they didn't even change the locks. But I pay really low rent, so I guess that's the price of it. To this day, I have no idea what happened, and I don't even want to know. It took me a few solid months to move on. You really think you're safe in your own house until something like this happens. Now I always make sure that I put my keys into the lock, and I even have a stool against the door. When we thought the door had just opened itself, I had a thought that maybe my cat then opened it wider. I don't know. This is so strange, and I hope nothing like this ever happens again. And I owe my cat for being a scaredy shit so she didn't run away and was just chilling outside the door. She got treats and snuggles the next day. And of course, my sweet neighbors who cared enough to check on me. I'll never forget that. So yeah, that's my weird and creepy story. I also have a message for anyone that's listening. Make sure you're safe in your own house, even if that means checking the doors and windows dozens of times. Losing that sense of safety really makes you hopeless and fearful like you've never felt before. Stay safe, everyone. This only happened a few months ago, and I don't even know if this guy still lives next door to me, but this really scared my family and I. I've been living in my village for about 2 years now, and we live next door to a little old lady and her one son. We're not really the kind of family that gets close with our neighbors. We're always civil, say hello, and our how are yous, but that's about it. The lady we live next door to has lived there for years. She seems pretty pleasant. I've never really spoken to her apart from a smile. She never smiles back, by the way. But my parents have spoken to her, and they said she seems nice enough. My mom and dad even gave her a lift home from town once, so I thought she was a normal old lady. As for her son, again, I've seen him about, but I've never spoken to him. We do hear him shouting next door sometimes, but we just thought that he's shouting at a games console or something. Anyway, I live with my mom, dad, brother, and partner, so it's a full house. And boy was I happy that my dad was home when this all went down. One night when we were all asleep, we were rudely awakened at about 2:30 a.m. to pounding on our front door. We have a little Jack Russell, so he had started barking his head off. The banging was really loud. It sounded like someone was trying to break into the house. I was terrified. My dad went downstairs to the front door, and he decided to open the door. Yes, I had a go at him for this the next day because this person could have gotten into our house, or even worse, he could have had a knife or a weapon. When my dad opened the door, he was met by a man. My dad had then asked, what's the problem? To which the man replied back with, "What's your f***ing problem?" My dad in an instant, which thank God for quick reflexes, slammed the door shut in the man's face and then locked the door. The man started to bang on the door yet again, and when he realized no one was going to answer it, he walked away. I was in my bedroom at the time, and I had looked out my window. I was trying to get a good look at the guy. The guy was shouting outside our house. Then I saw him walk to my neighbor's house where the old lady lives, and that's when I then heard someone say, "Mate, if you don't stop, I'm calling the police." Then the man disappeared. We were all in shock. The village we live in is very quiet. Nothing happens here at all. So we were definitely all pretty shaken. We were pretty much all awake for the rest of the night. Every slight noise scared me. My partner managed to sleep through all of it and only woke up when I accidentally stepped on him to look out the window, which he wasn't very happy about. He felt really bad the next day when he saw how shook up we all were. The next day we were all very alert. I kept my eyes peeled for this guy because I wanted to know who the hell he was. Well, about 2 days later, my partner and I were on our way to work, and there were lots of police that drove past us very quickly with sirens going. I had a bad feeling, so I had messaged my brother asking if everything was okay. I got no reply until I got to work, and then got a message from my dad. As it turns out, the man lived next door. Turns out this old lady didn't just have one son, she had two. My dad then told me that the man was carried out of my neighbor's house in handcuffs and on a stretcher. I felt relieved that he was going to get some help that he so clearly needs, and that hopefully he wouldn't come knocking again. But I was also thinking about how this guy lived next door and none of us knew. Well, he ended up being back 2 days later, so I bought a Ring doorbell straight away. Just so you all know, we didn't call the police. Maybe we should have, but we didn't. If he knocks on our door again, we definitely will. So a few weeks later, my mom was walking down our street and had bumped into another neighbor. This neighbor is someone my mom talks to sometimes. Not close to her or anything, but she seems like a nice lady. My mom had told her what happened, and the lady instantly told us that it was definitely her neighbor's son. Turns out the lady who lived in our house before had the same problem with this guy, but that he used to do it all the time. My mom was absolutely shocked by this. Luckily, we haven't seen this guy since. The little old lady next door hasn't spoken to us since. We think it's because she's ashamed, which is fair enough, but at the same time, I really think we're owed an apology or some kind of explanation. We could have easily called the police on this guy. We always say to ourselves that it's really lucky that he did this to us and not some single mother or someone vulnerable. But I don't ever want to go through this or see him again. I still get sleepless nights thinking that this guy will come back banging on our door, but I really hope it doesn't happen.
A few years back when I was in college, I used to work real late nights during the summer. I had an internship with a company that was way out in the middle of nowhere. Miles surrounding the area were just woods and fields. About a month into the job, I finished work one night at about 3 in the morning and then got into my car to drive home. It would usually take me about 20 minutes to get back to my temporary apartment that I lived in for the summer. About halfway through the drive, I started to hear my car sputter. It was an old beater because I was in college and I didn't have much money. I did what I could to keep the car going, but it ended up dying and slowly coming to a stop on the side of the road. This road was completely empty with no other cars in sight, and it was surrounded by a little ditch with woods on both sides. I tried starting the car multiple times, but I realized that it wasn't going to do much good. I wasn't much of a car expert, and I honestly had no clue what to do. I knew it wasn't out of gas, so I decided to call my roadside assistance. I was told due to my location it would take anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour for them to arrive. I decided to play on my phone and watch YouTube videos until they got there, so I took out my headphones and put them in. After I would guess about 15 or 20 minutes, I was interrupted by the sound of my back door trying to be opened. My doors were locked, and I figured the roadside service was there, so I took out my headphones and looked behind me expecting to see a truck, but nothing was there at all. The moon was fairly big that night, so I could see around pretty well due to the light, but I didn't see anybody. I spent a good minute just looking around trying to figure out who was trying to open my door. I knew what I heard, and I wasn't imagining it.
Then my eyes scanned around to the woods and I saw a tree move. When I looked closer, I saw what appeared to be a man digging at the base of a tree just inside the woods. He was wearing a green jacket and appeared to have brown hair and a dark-colored beard. That's all I was able to make out. He was on his knees and digging with his hands. The sight of it gave me a very creepy feeling. The thought of the man possibly trying to get into my car made me even more scared. So many questions went through my head, like who was this man and why was he in the middle of nowhere digging in the woods with his hands? The man continued to dig for several more minutes. I just sat in my car, being as still as I could, hoping he wouldn't come over to me. This went on for what felt like forever. Finally, I saw headlights behind me and a truck which was roadside service. When they pulled up, I saw the man turn and go deeper into the woods. But he didn't get up and run. He left on all fours like he was some sort of an animal. I was more than happy to get out of there, and very shortly after that, I got a new car. Hopefully nothing like that ever happens again. This story occurred in 2015. At the time, my wife and I had recently got a cabin far up north from where we lived. We intended on going up there to get away from things from time to time. The very first time we went up there, we planned on spending the weekend there, arriving on Friday and leaving on Sunday. It took about 4 hours to get there, and it was a pretty nice place. There was a lake surrounded by wilderness with cabins spread out very far away from each other. We really liked how secluded it was from everything else. Once we got there on Friday afternoon, we did some fishing and then went inside to go to bed. The cabin had pretty much just a little kitchen, a living room, a bathroom, and a bedroom. It wasn't that big at all, but had a comfortable amount of space. At about midnight, when we were just starting to fall asleep, we heard a knocking at our front door. I had no clue who could be knocking on the door at this time, or who would even know that we were here. It was very strange, but I decided to get up and go see. I slowly got out of bed and walked out of the bedroom. By the time I was out of the bedroom and into the living room, the knocking got a lot harder and turned into more of a pounding. This alarmed me a little bit more. The way the cabin was, you couldn't really see outside to the front of it unless you were in the kitchen window. Instead of going straight to the door, I decided to go to the window instead based on how violent the knocks were becoming. I slowly tiptoed to the kitchen window. As I did, the knocks grew even louder. By this time they were so hard, I feared that the door might break. I saw my wife start to come out of the bedroom, and I signaled for her to be quiet. As I looked out the window, all I could see was a large man with his back facing me, pounding on the door. He had to be 6.5 feet tall and weigh at least 250 pounds. He was wearing a hat, and I couldn't get a good look at his face at all. I considered my options of what I could do. I decided to turn on my porch light, hoping that it would scare him off. Looking back, it was probably dumb, but I didn't know what to do. When I turned on the light, the man was unfazed and just kept pounding. I remained sitting on the floor next to the window, just hoping he would go away. Finally, he did. I knew that was the only entrance to the cabin, so I felt relieved. But then, I started to hear pounding coming from the back of the cabin at the wall. My wife and I stayed put in an area where we couldn't be seen. Thankfully, we had shades covering all of our windows. The pounding continued at the rear of the cabin for about 5 minutes and then finally stopped. We sat there waiting for more to start up again somewhere, but it didn't. After about an hour of sitting up and discussing what had just happened, we finally decided to go back to bed. I didn't get a whole lot of sleep that night, and the next morning we went outside and saw that there were marks on our door as well as the wall at the back of our cabin from the man. There were also some plants that had been trampled. We considered leaving and driving back that day, but decided to stay. After another day of fishing and walking through the woods, we saw no one at all, which was nice, and then we went back to the cabin. We had a relaxing night watching a movie and then went to bed once again at about midnight. Then I heard a knocking on the front door again. As soon as I did, my heart sunk. Once again, the knocking slowly grew louder and louder. We decided to just wait it out and hope that the man didn't break the door down. It lasted for roughly 10 minutes, and finally the man left again. I think I got even less sleep that night. The next morning, my wife and I went outside and saw a piece of paper that was on the ground in front of the door. It had the words, "Get out," written on it. We decided to report what had happened to the police, and after filling out a report with them, we drove home. I don't think anything was found, and we decided to sell the cabin and get another one elsewhere. I'm not sure who the man was, or if it was just someone trying to scare us, but we were enjoying our new cabin much more. This story happened roughly 15 years ago. I was on my way driving back from college. I attended a school in Florida and lived in the Midwest, so it would always be a long drive back home. Usually, I would do the trip in 2 days, but on this time, I decided to drive through the night. I left my college campus and drove for many hours, only stopping for gas or food or to use the bathroom. I was actually making really good time, and when it got late at night, things got even better because traffic decreased a lot. I stopped and got some energy drinks to keep me up and drove for several hours. Then at about 3 in the morning, my light for gas came on, which usually meant I had about 40 miles before I would run out. I was honestly in the middle of nowhere, so I decided I would stop at the next exit and see if there was a gas station. An exit eventually came up, and I took it. I went right and drove down a very quiet road for a while. It took me maybe 2 or 3 miles, and I didn't really see anything, so I thought about turning around, but then I saw some lights up ahead which looked promising. The road curved a little, and then I came into a small town. The speed limit dropped all the way down to 20 miles per hour, and there was old, run-down looking buildings on each side. It honestly looked like a ghost town, but I figured they would have to have a gas station, so I slowly kept driving. But the farther I drove, I didn't see any gas station, and then there started to be mainly old houses, so I decided to turn around. I turned into a driveway, and as soon as I did, I saw the front door of the house open. An older-looking man came out and started walking to me. I made a signal with my hands that I was just turning around, and then I started backing out. The man looked a little confused. When I turned around and began driving the other direction, I saw that 2 more people were standing at the ends of their driveways, staring at me with angry looks on their faces. For some reason, it just really freaked me out. I decided to ignore it and keep driving. When I got back to the town, though, it got even worse. There were at least 10 people on each side of the road in front of the buildings, all staring at me. It was the creepiest thing I've ever seen. They all looked very unfriendly. As I drove the 20-mile-per-hour speed limit, they started to walk into the road, almost to approach my car. I wasn't sure what else to do, so I sped up and drove faster and faster until I was out of there. I quickly got back onto the main freeway and drove until I saw another exit about 10 miles down the road. It was a close call, but I was able to find a gas station and fill my tank. I drove home after that, and I'm not even sure where that was, but something about that small town at 3 a.m. and all the people in it was just so creepy. It still gives me the chills to think about.
I used to live in a study apartment here in Denmark back in 2017. Study apartments are basically very small, typically one-room apartments, serving as a way for young people to be able to move away from home, despite not having much money. There is usually a long wait to get into these apartments, but after signing up for the wait list, it wasn't long before I was approved to move in. It all happened so fast, and before I knew it, I had a place of my own. The apartment was located in a sketchy neighborhood. Mostly low-income families living off welfare, or people with special needs, who were dumped there by the government. This didn't bother me though. I got to have my very own place at a relatively young age, which was a huge accomplishment for me. Here I could hang out with my friends, bring my girlfriend over, and generally enjoy the feeling of being an adult. While I was living there, nothing creepy ever really happened, aside from dealing with an old lady who was mentally ill. She would always scream at other residents, cursing at them. She was the kind of crazy that made you always look around when you pulled into the parking lot. You might want to park elsewhere if she was out and about. I found out that she didn't pay her electric bill because she believed that the government was monitoring her. She also always wore a bicycle helmet because she wanted to shield her brain from aliens trying to snatch it. I knew all of this from my friend who was dating a girl who worked with elderly citizens. I never really felt unsafe in my apartment complex because of this. I was just aware of my surroundings, and I always made sure to lock my doors and check my apartment before going to bed, on the off chance that crazy old lady was hiding somewhere, thinking that I was a gray. However, one night, after a gaming session that lasted until around 3 a.m., I had just gone to bed and turned off my lights. I was very close to falling asleep when suddenly my doorbell rang. It was so loud and sudden that I almost flew out of bed. I sat up and carefully listened to the eerie silence that followed the ring. Mind you, this was 3 a.m., and I was not expecting any visitors. My front door had a wooden frame, with slot windows at the bottom and top, which I had covered with paper so that people could not see inside. But even with the paper covering the openings, the hallway light still outlined the silhouette of someone standing outside of my front door. Upon seeing this, I became alarmed as I approached. "Can I help you with something?" Please let me in. I need your help, please." The voice sounded drunk, but in a fake, pretend kind of way. "What do you want? Who are you?" Please help me. I need your help. Please just let me inside." No way, man. I don't even know who the fuck you are. Do you have any idea what time it is? Just let me in, I swear. I'm not going to hurt you." Hearing this made everything seem much more creepy than it already was. I grabbed my golf club from behind my door. "Listen, I don't know what you need help with, but you had better speak up, or I'm coming out there, and you're not going to like what happens." I'm looking for number 86. Please, just let me in." 86? You're at 64. You're on the wrong level. Is this what you needed help with? The man then started to loudly bang on my door. I grabbed the doorknob and prepared myself for a confrontation. Suddenly, the pounding stopped, and I could hear the man's phone vibrating. "Hello? Okay." He then addressed me. His voice now sounded sharp and confident. "I don't need your help anymore." He then slowly walked back down the hallway and left. I was in full combat mode, but now I was just confused and a bit freaked out by the situation. I don't really have any enemies that would send a hitman to come deal with me. Maybe the guy was at the wrong place, or perhaps it was just some psychopath messing with people at 3 o'clock in the morning. After this occurrence, I stayed up for about another hour or so, smoking cigarettes and waiting to see if he would return, but he never did. To this day, I still have no idea what the person wanted. However, the sudden shift from sounding fake drunk to perfectly sober makes me think this wasn't your typical situation. Besides, who knocks on some random person's door at 3 a.m. with all the lights off? Not to mention his comment about not hurting me. I think if I had opened that door, something bad would have happened. I'm glad I decided to keep it shut. This entire ordeal has shady written all over it. And I'm happy to say that nothing else like that happened again. And I ended up leaving that place 2 years later. This happened about 15 years ago. I was 21 years old and living in my very first apartment. It was a small bachelor apartment in a sketchy area. I grew up in a town that was known to be rough and tough, and I knew how to handle myself and learned at a young age to keep my head down and not go looking for trouble. My apartment building was behind a bar. A lot of the patrons of the bar would stand outside and smoke. When they did this, they would be facing my apartment. Most of the smokers would keep to themselves. A few would nod and say hello if I passed by, and I never had any issues. Until one evening. That night, I came home from work. I passed by the bar and saw this extremely tall man outside smoking. As I passed, he stared daggers at me. I gave him a slight nod and he acknowledged me, but he just continued staring. It made me feel uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it. About an hour later, I hear a knock at my door. It was odd because you have to buzz people into the building. The complex only had 8 units, and I didn't really know any of my neighbors. I froze because I didn't really want to talk to anyone, but the knocking continued. I finally shouted, "Who is it?" A voice on the other side replied, "It's Tom." "I don't know anyone named Tom. I think you must have the wrong apartment." The voice then said, "You don't know me, but I know you. Open up, so we can talk." I walked over to the peephole and saw that it was the tall man from the bar. I loudly said, "Or I'm calling the cops." I then heard him walking away and heard the exit door opening and closing. He was gone, or so I thought. A few minutes later, I peeked out the window and saw that the tall man was standing in the parking lot. He seemed to be talking to himself. At this point, I'm freaking out. I called up my landlord who lived in the building next to me. He told me to call the police, and in the meantime, he and his brother would go check things out. I call up the cops and I tell them what's going on. They said that they would send a car. Meanwhile, my landlord and his brother make their way to the parking lot. I watched out my window and saw them approaching the man. He took one look at them and then bolted. My landlord and his brother tried chasing him down, but he got away. 5 minutes later, the police arrive. I gave my version of events and also a description of the man. The officer stares at me and says, "It's a good thing you didn't answer the door. We've had reports come in of a man matching that description who has sexually assaulted women." A few days later, I get a call from the officer. He told me that as part of their investigation, they were talking to the owner of the bar. The owner informed them that the tall man appeared there a few days later, and the police responded and arrested him. This happened to me about 4 years ago. I was living with a roommate at an apartment complex in a bad area. It wasn't terrible, but it was right by a busy road that seemed to attract a lot of crime. As a woman, it was the kind of place you didn't want to walk around at night. I had, and had been harassed almost every time. This was before I had a car. It was about 3 a.m., My roommate was dead asleep. I was awake. Who knows why. I was in my room on the computer when I heard a knock at the door. It was literally just one knock. I took off my headphones to make sure I had actually heard it. After a few seconds of pause, another knock came. It then began a rhythm. It wasn't your typical someone knocking at the door wanting to see you. It was a slow, continuous one, almost like a heartbeat. Instantly, I was alarmed, but I decided to just leave it alone. I would wait and see if maybe it was some drunk who had gotten confused and would toddle off after a while. Minutes passed, and the knocking did not stop, and it never picked up or slowed down. It was just a continuous, rhythmic knocking. After some time, I heard the person try for the doorknob. Instantly, I was fearing for my life. Without waking my roommate, I went into the living room and shouted through the door, "Who is it?" The knocking suddenly stopped. I decided to look out the peephole and see who it was. I know this sounds like a horror movie, but I saw nothing. At that point, I backed away, and after I did, the knocking resumed. My shouting had woken up my roommate, who was now asking what the hell was going on. I told her that someone was knocking at the door, and they must have been hiding around the side, because I couldn't see anybody there. We called up the police, and they arrived about 10 minutes later. During that 10 minutes, my roommate and I had locked ourselves inside the bathroom, while this psycho kept doing that slow knocking. Once the cops showed up, we were safe to come out and had a look at who was doing this to us. It was a boy probably no older than 18. They had him restrained and had confiscated a backpack from him. Inside the backpack was a shocking amount of drugs, and even worse, a knife. I had never seen this kid before, but we were told he lived across the parking lot from us, in the exact same complex. The kid wouldn't say what he was doing here, but the contents of his backpack sent deep chills through my body. I'm certain that he was planning to use the drugs on us, and then assault and possibly kill us. The kid was arrested and jailed for some time, not long enough in my opinion. But after he was released, I heard that he ran away. He had been living with his dad at the apartments. I haven't heard anything about him since, but my roommate and I moved to a nicer area shortly after this event. I seriously hope he gets locked up again, because it's clear he had every intent to victimize us, and I have no doubts that he would try it again. I'll never forget the way he knocked at our door. It filled me with a sense of dread I had never felt in my life. This story doesn't directly involve me. It did happen while I was in the same house, and I probably would have been a victim if it hadn't been for our family dog, Sammy. In the early 80s, Columbus, Ohio was at the mercy of a man who was known as the Grandview Rapist. When he was caught, he was connected to over 60 crimes and was suspected in at least 40 more. One of the ways that he was getting into houses was by posing as a gas reader. He would target women who were alone with children. He would enter these houses and then threaten to kill the children if the women did not comply. I don't know how things worked in other areas, but here in Columbus, during the 80s anyway, letting a gas reader into your house was a normal thing. There were lots of meters in the basement, and it was the kind of thing you didn't really give a second thought to. One day there was a knock at our back door, and a man called out, "Hello, I'm here to read the gas meter." My mom thought this was kind of strange. Our driveway at the time wrapped around the house, and if he pulled far enough up, the back door would be closer than the front. So she figured that's what happened. She went to let the man in. No sooner had she opened the door, Sammy came charging into the room, frothing at the mouth and snarling. Now here's a little bit of background on Sammy. She was a black lab that we had rescued. Before we adopted her, she had been struck by a car and had been brought into the Ohio State University Vet Hospital. She survived her surgeries, but because of them, she was full of screws, splints, and plates. Any sort of physical activity would cause her great pain. She's also the most laid-back dog I've ever met. She did not growl, she didn't bark, and she didn't really seem to care if she had never met you before or not. That was a dog who was frothing at the mouth in anger and jumping so hard at the back door that she not only pushed it closed, she actually broke the window on the door by slamming into it. All the while, my mother was trying to hold her back, saying to the man, "Oh, I'm sorry, she's never like this." After several minutes, this guy runs off. He does not hop back into a work vehicle. He runs away on foot. It wasn't until after the man left that my mom began to think how odd this entire situation was. The man she saw was not wearing a uniform or had a clipboard. She didn't even see a name tag either, so she decided to report it to the police. The operator told her to lock all the doors and to stay on the line. Within minutes, there were a trio of cruisers out front and several more cops combing the area. Sammy was back to her normal self again, laying on her side and begging for treats whenever an officer came by. I was only 2 or 3 years old at the time, but I remember this part vividly. My mother gave a description of the man. This part was relayed to me later. He was a white male, fit, mid to late 20s, with sandy blonde hair. The officer then told my mother we owed our dog a steak dinner. He said that this suspect would stalk houses while husbands were away at work, and they also suspected that he would observe school bus stops to find women who were home alone with small children, and then knock on their doors pretending to be a gas man. There was a bus stop right outside of our front yard. I wish I could tell you that there was a happy ending here, but unfortunately there isn't. It was only when I was researching this story when I came across the most chilling discrepancy. The man who was convicted for these crimes was an older black man. My mother distinctly remembered seeing a younger white man. I know for a fact that several women had been violated in that same area around the same time. It was entirely possible that there was more than one man preying on women in that same area. To my knowledge, the man whom my mother encountered at our back door was never caught. The story happened in the fall of 2009. I used to live in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. For some information, my name is Vanessa, and I'm a 30-year-old woman, but I was 16 back then. And this was the year that I got my driver's license. And my father bought me my first car, which was a 2009 Infiniti G37 sedan. I have 3 sisters named Sasha, Clarice, and Sabrina. They were all happy for me when I got my driver's license. So to celebrate, we decided to take a road trip to Delaware County to visit our cousins and other extended family members. Our father and stepmother were not very strict parents and were pretty laid back, so they didn't mind us taking this trip. They just reminded us to drive carefully and to always be aware of other drivers on the road. So we packed our bags and hit the road to spend the weekend at our uncle's house. The road trip to Delaware County went well, but when we headed back is where went south. We were supposed to leave Sunday afternoon, but we were all having a good time with our cousins, so we didn't pay attention to the time and ended up leaving around 9 p.m. Unfortunately, we had to go because we had school the next day. There wasn't a lot of traffic, and we made a stop at a random Target store so we could buy some snacks. Almost no one was in the store except for this strange man who kept staring at us. He was about 6 feet tall, had long, greasy, unkempt hair, and yellow teeth. My sisters and I noticed him and told each other to keep our distance. While we were creeped out by this guy, we didn't think too much of it, but we started to get worried. Whenever we would go down another aisle, he would follow us. He eventually addressed us and said,
"Oh, you girls look so gorgeous tonight."
Sabrina, who has a big mouth, responded with,
Ew, get a life.
You better watch your mouth, little girl, before I squeeze the life out of you. I gave you a compliment, and you have the nerve to run your mouth.
This is when I told my sisters that we should leave. We went to the checkout line and paid for our snacks, but when we got outside and walked towards our car, the man emerged from between two parked cars and rushed at us with a knife.
"I'm gonna watch your guts spill out like sausages."
We went into full panic mode and began running. We decided not to run to our cars, because if we tried to open our car doors, the maniac would definitely catch us. Luckily, the man wasn't very fast, and he could not keep up with us. We crossed the street and decided to hide behind some large trees. We managed to outrun him, but he was still looking for us.
"I'm gonna find you, and when I do, I'm going to enjoy separating your heads from your bodies."
Fortunately, he did not see us, and we were able to run back to our car. It was only when we got back that he finally spotted us. I quickly put the car into drive and floored it out of there. But the drama was far from over. To our absolute horror, a pickup truck began tailing us. I made a quick getaway from the Target parking lot, but I wasn't driving very fast because I thought it was over. The road we were driving on now was narrow, so I couldn't go any faster to escape him. He was tailgating us and even hit the back of my car. Eventually the road widened, so I used it to my advantage and put the pedal to the floor. His old truck couldn't keep up. I then made a sharp right turn. He also turned, but he was too far behind. By the time we got to the highway, I lost him completely. Looking back now, I regret not going to the police station, but we were all freaking out and not thinking clearly. But in the end, I'm glad that we didn't get decapitated by that absolute maniac.
This incident happened about 5 years ago. This is a story that I never really tell anymore, because most people are either uncomfortable hearing it or make well-meaning comments about what I should have done in this situation, without really understanding how differently your mind works when you're experiencing absolute panic. So here's my story. I was living in a relatively nice apartment in downtown Memphis, working as an ophthalmic technician. I arrived home from work at my usual time, which was around 4:30 p.m. Unlocked my door and went inside. I set my phone, wallet, and keys on the kitchen island, hearing my heavy metal front door swing shut loudly behind me, and began taking care of some errands around the house. Having grown up in a small town, it was habitual for me to not lock my door during the day, especially when I knew my husband would be home soon anyway. I've never forgotten to lock my door once in 5 years since this day. I walked through my bathroom and into my large walk-in closet and began hanging up the laundry that I'd started earlier in the day before I left for work. My front door opened. I smiled with surprise. My husband was home a little early, and I happily called out to him, "I'm in here, love." I was met with silence. and slowly began to feel that sinking feeling of something is wrong crawl up my spine. I tried to shake it off, thinking my husband simply hadn't heard me, and walked out of my living room kitchen area. Standing on the other side of my kitchen island was a complete stranger. He was male, older than me, I would estimate in his 50s, just standing there staring at me. No ski mask, no weapon, just watching me. I wondered if he'd maybe walked into the wrong apartment and was going to apologize and leave. But as he continued to stare, I realized that I needed to do something other than just gape at the stranger inside my house. I stood tall, puffed out my chest in an attempt to look more threatening, which is hard to do as a small female, but used a loud, clear voice, telling him to get out of my apartment, that he had no business being here. He completely ignored me, like I hadn't even spoken. Then began to pick up my things, my cell phone, my keys, my wallet. He picked them up methodically and put them into his own pockets. And that's when it hit me that this person is truly dangerous. I was naive enough to believe this was all a mistake until that moment. I darted forward toward the only other device that I had that would allow me to get help, my computer. I had to take a few steps closer to the intruder in order to reach it, but I still had 12 to 15 feet between us, so I knew I could grab it and run before he could reach me. As I picked it up and turned to run, I saw him start to move after me. I sprinted back toward the bathroom because it was the only place I could go and put two locked doors between us, my bathroom door and the closet door. I slammed and locked the first door, and within seconds, I could hear him messing with it, trying to open it. I ran into the closet and locked that door too, opening my computer and getting on Facebook Messenger to contact my husband. I sent message after message, pleading with him to call 911 and tell them that there was an intruder in our apartment. He got the messages within minutes and assured me that he had a dispatcher on the phone and he was leaving work himself to try and get to me if he could. I waited and waited. The bathroom door opened, and the intruder came inside. He moved to the closet door and started to break down that door too. Here's the part where people usually start giving me advice on how I should have acted, but all I can tell you is that I was frozen in the moments. With fear and shock, I don't know, but I didn't scream or cry, or search for a weapon in that dark closet. I didn't brace the door or try to hold it closed. I just kneeled in my closet and waited to die, because that's what I thought was going to happen. People also like to tell me that I lived in an apartment. Surely if I'd screamed, someone would have heard and come help. Surely there was something heavy enough in my closet to use to defend myself. Hell, even the laptop I had would hurt someone if I swung it at him. Why didn't I do anything? I don't really have an answer for that, but the closet door miraculously held. I heard frustrated footsteps go back into the living area of my apartment. I heard things breaking, bottles shattering, my drawers and refrigerator cabinets being flung open, and things were torn out of them. I continued to sit in that closet, silently crying and waiting to leave, feeling that death was inevitable. I feel awful about my selfishness in the moment, and I messaged my mom, who lived a 15-hour drive away, and told her what was happening as well. I desperately wanted comfort, and to tell her how much I loved her. I'm not a parent, but I can only imagine the fear and helplessness I put her in, knowing that her daughter was in danger and there was nothing she could do to help. She messaged me back constantly, begging me to keep replying. I told her I would as long as I could, but I also told her to tell my brothers that I loved them, and to help my husband through whatever happened next if it ended badly for me. The intruder came back and started messing with the closet door again, mumbling disjointed words that I couldn't really distinguish. I remember hoping that the police would get to the apartment before my husband, that he wouldn't be the one to find me in whatever state this invader left me in. The front door opened once more, but this time it was my husband shouting for me. The intruder walked out toward the living room kitchen area again, and I opened up the door and darted from the closet to find my husband on the ground with him, pinning him in place. The man kept mumbling and at times yelling, but never really put up much resistance. This entire part is a blur for me. I remember feeling like the room was spinning, filling with fear mostly for my husband at this point. Eventually the police found the apartment It took them about 25 minutes to arrive, which still blows my mind. I know that time seems to move slowly during scary situations, so I thought it was less than that. But from the time my husband dialed 911 to the time the officers arrived, it was 25 excruciating minutes. This isn't intended to bash them in any way. It just seemed like an unusually long time for a response to a home invasion. They got my things back from the man and took him out of my apartment. I numbly went through the process of filing a police report and telling them what happened. One of the officers commented that I really should keep my doors locked at all times. I remember feeling like he was being very insensitive or blaming me for what happened. But later, recognized his words were coming from experience. I'm sure he's seen this situation end differently for other women. Within 30 minutes, the scariest incident in my life was over, but I've carried the fear, the violation, and the anxiety of having someone intrude into my space for years. If it happened to me once, it could happen to me again. If this or something similar has happened to you and you're struggling with the aftermath of it, the sleepless nights, the lying awake listening for sounds of forced entry, the nightmares, the constant check and rechecking your locks, this is what eventually helped me. A year after this took place, my husband and I moved to the Midwest for his job. We selected a safe town with a nice apartment complex and chose the third-floor apartment with only one point of entry. I looked up every statistic on crime for that neighborhood, finding only one incident that isolated for a car theft, and it was the only thing reported in decades. I still couldn't sleep at night. It was definitely better than staying in that same apartment in Memphis, but my husband often worked night shift now, and I couldn't simply continue being terrified to sleep at night. I realized my biggest fear wasn't that something could happen again, but that if it did, I was just as unprepared now as I was then. I hadn't changed anything other than locking my doors, and I knew I would likely freeze up again and leave my life up to being able to hide well enough or having a door hold long enough to save me, and that was unacceptable. I walked into a martial arts school with an excellent self-defense program, introduced myself, and started taking classes. At first, I was quiet, hiding in the back of the room and generally keeping to myself. My instructor, who was both incredibly kind and incredibly insightful, slowly built up my confidence and brought me out of my bubble of fear. After several months of training, I finally shared my reason for taking classes with him, and he's worked with me tirelessly to give me the ability to protect myself in any environment. I've been training for years now, and the difference has made in every aspect of my life is unbelievable. The meek, quiet girl that waited to die in her closet does not exist. I'm confident, I'm strong, I'm worthy of living and protecting myself in my home. I'm no longer ashamed of how I handled the situation I was in, but I also understand what steps I can take to ensure that I'm safe. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen overnight, but it was worth it. I recognize this might not be a solution or option for everyone. Your experience is valid, and however you decide to cope with your own story is the right choice for you. This is how I happen to do it, and it's worked well for me. Thank you again for listening. I'm a little afraid to share this because I'm not sure how people will respond. Maybe doing so will help someone else that's feeling alone with this. If anyone is struggling with their own story and wants a kind ear to listen, I'm here. Stay safe out there.
In 2014, my family and I decided to move from our old apartment in Brooklyn to the rolling hills of Tennessee. According to my parents, life was a lot more easier there. They had hated the city, and as they both got older, they grew more attached to the outskirts of the countryside. At the time, the cost of plane tickets were at an all-time high, and we didn't have much money to spare. Because of this, my parents had decided that we drive from New York all the way to Tennessee. It was a long drive, but considering the amount of road trips we did over the years, it was definitely possible. Anyway, we had packed everything up and began the 15-hour drive to Gatlinburg, about 4 hours outside of Nashville. It was a long drive, but we were about halfway through and we weren't about to just give up. If I can remember, we were driving on a road somewhere in Kentucky or West Virginia that stretched across the state. It's around 1 a.m. and I wake up when I start to feel the car slowly coming to a stop. As I awoke, I asked my dad why we had stopped, and that was when I noticed what appeared to be a person laying in the middle of the road. Right then, I knew it was a woman, maybe mid-40s, black hair, and appeared to be wearing a sweater. At this point, my parents are confused and worried when my dad tells us to stay in the car as he begins to get out. With my dad being ex-military, his instinct was to help the person in need or prepare for the worst. My mom and I see my dad approach the woman, still laying face down on the pavement, when he turns her over and immediately steps back. It was a little hard to see, but we can see my dad appear to start panicking and run back to the car where he just drives off. I was only able to take one glance at her as we went by, and what I saw made me understand why my dad was so scared. The only way I could describe her was that her face looked contorted. Her eyes bulging, her jaw misaligned, and her right arm behind her. It was a scene where I didn't think any human was even capable to do this to someone. The only thing my dad saw that could possibly give an explanation as to who did this was a blue star spray painted on the road beside her. We didn't know what it meant or who put it there, but my family believes that it was a symbol to represent a group of killers. I know, crazy theory, right? But can you blame us? It took another 3 hours before we got to the next town, where my dad was thankfully able to file a police report. We didn't know the exact location of the murder, other than on a road in the middle of nowhere. I'm not sure if the proper authorities took action or not, but I'd like to think they did and opened an investigation. 2 months later, I was scrolling through Reddit when I came across a post that mainly focused on disappearances and theories. I was into the mystery behind all that type of stuff, so I found it interesting. The post I was looking at had multiple photos and videos of theories and clues as to how or why these people might have disappeared. I ended up landing on one of the photos that had something that looked awfully familiar, and that's when I saw the blue star. The same blue star I had seen on the road that night. This time, someone had taken a picture of one that had been spray painted on the bark of a tree. The title of the post read something along the lines of, "Found this symbol on a hike." The thread was full of replies and comments of theories as to who might have done this. Everything from the smiley face killers all the way to ritualistic sacrifices from a cult. Hell, there was even a comment about how it could be the work of aliens. The thing that everyone could come up with was that they were just another group of killers nicknamed the Star Killers. All these theories were valid, but I wasn't gonna go digging for the most plausible explanation. My family never received an update about the incident, and we aren't expecting one. If anyone has more info on the Star Killers, please inform people about them. Back in 2007, I took a trip up to Ohio to visit a friend that had recently moved away for college. I attended school in my hometown as I didn't have the money to go out of state, nor did I even want to. The friend I had been going to visit was one of my best friends throughout middle and high school. The type of friend who'd always have your back and was someone you could rely on. As the saying goes, all good things must come to an end, and that summer he had moved away. However, seeing as winter break would finally be upon us, I decided to use that time to go and visit him. For context, I live all the way in North Carolina, meaning I'd have to drive a lot. I didn't mind it though, as I love road trips and always found them relaxing as it was time to myself at the end of the day. I'd always stop at attractions in different states and even stop along the roads and take pictures of the valley. Anyway, this happened the evening on the first day I had left. I was driving down I-75 in Kentucky when I happened to notice a sign that showed that there was a rest stop at the next exit. After all, I was pretty hungry and I still had another few hours to go. Keep in mind, I was in a rural area, so there was nothing out here for miles other than a long stretch of road. That being said, I pull off to the side and enter the rest stop, hoping to grab some hot food while I'm there. There were no other cars and only 2 places off this exit, the rest stop and an older-looking gas station. I get out of my car and instantly notice that it appeared to be closed. I checked my watch and it was 3:30 p.m. What kind of gas station closes past noon? I thought to myself. Upon looking inside, however, I could tell that it had been closed for a while. In fact, there was seemingly nothing inside other than a few shelves moved around and a few broken beer bottles. This confirmed that it was indeed abandoned, which disappointed me. As I was about to get back in my car, I can see someone's head peer out from behind the gas station. They didn't reveal themselves, but I could tell they were watching me but trying to not be seen. I gave a quick wave, making it known that I had saw them, but they had no reaction to this. As I approach my car, I then see the person step out from behind the building, revealing themselves. It was a man who appeared to be in his 40s or 50s. He was not a pleasant-looking man. While it might have been a little weird, I didn't feel threatened by his presence, as I just assumed he might have been homeless. In a respectful tone, I tell him I was leaving now and that I'd let him be. This seemed to work, as I then saw him go back behind the gas station out of sight. I get back in my car and pull out of the rest stop and back onto the road. About 20 minutes later, I'm still on the road when all of a sudden my car starts making this screeching noise before completely breaking down. Cussing to myself, I pull over and step outside to see what the problem was. What I saw sent chills down my spine. All 4 tires of my car had been slashed. All of them. I then came to the realization that someone had to have done this while I was looking into the gas station. Mind you, my tires were really good ones and could withstand sharp objects, so I knew for a fact that this was no accident. At that point, I obviously called the police, where my car had been towed to a body shop that wasn't too far. I had to pay and wait nearly an hour for the new tires before I was able to get back on the road and finish the drive. Police had said they looked into the rest stop, but whoever did this to my car was long gone. I knew right then that whoever had done this had to be involved with the man I had seen. The rest of my trip went as planned and I was able to see my friend. I have told many people about this story and many have claimed that it was just intoxicated homeless squatters. I have no idea what their intentions were or what would have happened had I stayed longer. Needless to say, however, I'm very glad I got out of there when I did. From now on, I always try to avoid rest stops unless they're open, and I'm always more cautious of my car.
When I was in 8th grade, my dad splurged and bought his dream car. I was much too young at the time to drive, so I don't remember any of the specs. But the gist is, he purchased a convertible BMW Z4. It was silver through and through, with chrome and glass for the accents. It was an absolutely beautiful machine, and had a lot of power underneath that hood. Well, that first year that he bought it, he wanted to go on a road trip with me, a way to celebrate, a way to bond, and a way to break in the new ride. He even said he'd give me some driving instructions. All of it sounded fun, so when school got out that summer, we packed up and hit the road for about a week total. We couldn't fit much more in the way of clothes and supplies in the trunk and the back seat. If you've never seen one, Google it. Z4s are very small cars, but it was fun, and we hit the road with a good idea of where we were going, as my dad and I had been loosely planning our trip for about a month or two. We'd go north at first, then shoot over west before coming down the coastal highway through California. We jammed music, talked about life, told stories from the good old days, typical father-son stuff. We even told riddles and jokes, some of my favorite pastimes. We saw all manner of beautiful terrain, mostly canyons and valleys throughout the Southwest and the Pacific Northwest. It was cool, and I loved every minute of it. Stopping was a treat too. I was a fat kid growing up, so I loved all that gas station delight food, and we got a lot to eat. Chips, jerky, soda, gut bomb burgers, all of it. Other times we would stop at nicer hotels, and this would prompt my dad to seek out nicer restaurants for us to eat at. It was a cool dichotomy and seemed to satisfy both of us. There was one night that we rolled into some mid-sized town, and I can't remember the name of it. Litchfield or Litchbrook, something like that. This was one of the stops where we got a nice hotel room. We hit the pool, then wandered around downtown a bit. I remember we were both gawking at all the ladies. Literally every single woman that we laid eyes on was prettier than the last. "It's like there's something in the water out here, son," I remember my dad saying. "You might be hitting the road on your own tomorrow." After a nice dinner and a walkabout, we decided to head back to the hotel room. I could tell something weird was going on right when I saw the place. There was this small crowd clustered around some cars that were parked funny. My dad didn't seem to bat an eye, didn't say anything about them, so I just kept on cruising too. I didn't want to seem like a big baby or anything, since I guess technically nothing was really going on, but still it was weird. I remember leaving a lingering eye on that crowd as I closed the door behind me and turned the deadbolt until it locked. We were on the ground floor. Well, the whole hotel was, so it's not like it was super fancy or anything. It also didn't have any kind of great security. It was a standard hotel door, standard double locking system with a deadbolt and chain. A huge viewing window right by the door, and curtains pulled closed over it. Pretty typical. We settle in, and I start eating some peanut M&Ms. This was another staple for these road trips, as they were my dad's favorite candy. We were watching reruns of Seinfeld when I heard the first few shouts come from outside. I turned and peeked, but Dad just kept watching TV. The guy seemed unshakable. "You think they're just drunk out there or something?" I asked. "It's none of our business," was all Dad said. I nodded and felt like I learned a valuable life lesson there. By the time it hit 9 p.m., we were both pretty beat, so decided to turn in for the night. The riffraff outside seemed to have settled down, and we wanted to get out of town by 6 or 7 a.m. to stay on schedule, so trying to pass out just made sense. We did our bathroom ritual and then promptly went to bed. I didn't fall asleep though. You see, my dad has this magical ability to be able to fall asleep anywhere, at any time, no matter what's going on. He was snoring loud as hell, and outside I could hear those voices getting louder again. My anxiety was further amplified by the fact that I was alone, or at least the only one awake. It just makes things that much worse when you're the only one privy to what is actually happening. Outside it sounded like your pretty average tailgate party. After listening in for a bit, something changed though. Instead of cheering and vibing, it sounded like voices were getting heated, agitated. I kept checking the clock. Around 10:30, the agitation started, and by 11:30, the guys were full on shouting at each other. I could hear a few people trying to mediate, but whatever was happening was quickly getting out of hand. Out of nowhere, the snoring stopped. My dad popped out of bed. He pulled his shirt on and moved to the window, peeked through the blinds. I had my eyes cracked open so I could see his expression. He kept a perfect poker face, just observing whatever was going on out there. My dad was a former Marine, and honestly, we had all heard rumors at family reunions and our get-togethers that in his youth, he'd beat a man to death during a bar fight, then fled town right after. Lack of evidence kept him from ever going to prison. "What's going on out there, Dad?" I asked. "Just a bunch of drunks," was his retort. Dad had also been sober for a couple of years, had a particular disdain for those that got drunk in public. He was a tight ass, is what I'm saying, and now a bunch of strangers had woken him up dead of the night. Any fear I had quickly dissolved. The voices got louder and louder outside, and my dad didn't really miss a beat. He pulled on a pair of shorts and his shoes and started for the door. "There's a gun underneath my pillow," he said. "Keep an eye out and don't open up the door for anyone." With that, my dad disappeared into the darkness. I hopped out of bed and immediately shouldered up to the window. It had one of those big, heavy curtains draped in front of it, the kind that could pass for a comforter. I peeled back one edge and looked out with a single eye. I had nailed those sounds that I was hearing earlier. There was a little tailgate party in the far parking lot of the hotel. One of the trucks seemed to be for the road company of some kind, like highway maintenance or something. It had cones and stuff in the back, and one big decal on the side. Definitely a work truck. My dad approached these guys from the shadows. He skulked around the side of the building and stuck to hard-to-see places. Only once he was pretty much on top of them did he step out and make his presence known. The crowd flinched at first, then turned and got somewhat silent. I couldn't hear the words, but Dad was moving as he spoke, motioning to the hotel room and then his car. Everyone nodded along, then he said goodnight. Dad always gave off this cop energy, so people usually listened to him. He came back to the room, slipped the key in, and then sat on the bed. "So much for a decent night's sleep," he said, checking his phone. "You should try to get a little more rest. Everything should be good now, son." And I did. I was tired as hell from the drive and sitting up all night. It was well past midnight at this point. My eyes were burning. But with the brief silence and security of my dad, I slipped off into nothingness. I don't know for how long, but what felt like just seconds later, I was shocked awake by a pounding on the door. I remember what my dad said in the moment: "Don't open the door for anyone." But for some reason, I had it in my head that he was still outside, that no time had gone by at all, and I just fallen asleep while he was having his first little conversation with them out there. I hopped up in a panic and rushed for the door, only to feel a heavy hand come down on my shoulder. Startled, I whirled around, and there was my dad sitting on the edge of his bed. "We're all here, we're all good," he assured me. "Just that nonsense outside." He was projecting confidence, but I could tell my dad was a little rattled. Maybe he'd been sleeping too, and now he didn't know what was going on. Whoever was out the door kept banging and started to holler throughout the walls. "Help me! Please, you gotta let me in!" Beyond that, we could hear voices from earlier, closing in on the room. Dad took his pistol and went to the window, took a peek and didn't like what he saw. The guy caught a glimpse of him through the glass, started banging on the window, begging and pleading for us to open up the door. "Please, man, they're gonna kill me out here, please!" "Why? What'd you do?" my dad shouted through the glass. He turned to me and pointed to his phone. He told me to call 911. Any kind of talk about death was reason to have cops on site. I grabbed his phone, but in my stupid kid confidence, I dialed 911 but didn't hit the call button. I got off the bed and went to my dad's side and looked out. There was a small mob coming up from behind this guy, those people from earlier. I looked at the guy at the door, and I didn't really recognize him. He was dressed different from everyone else. That's when I noticed that logo on his clothing. It was the same as the work truck in the corner of the parking lot. "Dad, I think that's his truck," I said, pointing. "What are you saying?" he asked me. As quickly as I could, I tried to explain what was running through my mind. This guy was just trying to get to his work truck when the drunk people decided to mess with him. I didn't know if I was actually right, but in the moment it kind of made sense to me. My dad pointed to the guy, who was about to start kicking in our door, and hollered out a question. "Is that your truck out there?" "Yes." My dad took a sharp breath through his teeth, unbolted the lock, and swung the door open. He didn't let the guy come inside, just stood right in his way. He brought the pistol up to eye level and let everyone outside get a good look at it too. The guy still tried to barrel inside the room, but Dad stayed firm in his way. "I just called the police," he shouted over the voices. That seemed to get everyone's attention pretty quickly. That's when I realized I never dialed it, but seeing everyone tuck their tail and start to leave, I figured it was all over. The guy at our door collapsed against the exterior wall and started explaining everything. He was staying a couple of doors down. He'd been out having a few beers when he made the walk back to the hotel. Right away, he noticed the commotion around his truck. That being said that he was in town to finish a job. He didn't want anything happening to his equipment. He said he made a simple request for them to please get away from his vehicle. The crowd had been boozed up at this point, and so was that roadway worker. What started as a question quickly turned into a barking match. The solo guy was severely outgunned. One push led to another. Soon the guy was surrounded. He said he squared up and swung his way out of the circle, but they laid a pretty good beating on him. It was obvious. His room key fell out of his pocket during the scuffle. He just went door to door, begging for help while these people chased him around. Well, at least that was the partial story. The overnight clerk saw some of the incident from his office, and he really did call the cops. They dropped in out of nowhere, just like my dad. His cruisers rolled into the parking lot, even without so much as headlights on, let alone a siren. They corralled anyone who hadn't already fled. Then the real story came out. It turned out the roadway worker had been having some beers at a nearby bar, but so had that entire crowd. Words were exchanged before finally the bartender kicked them all out. As they wandered the streets talking trash, they recognized the guy's truck in the hotel parking lot. They went and bought a case of beer, then literally tailgated on the guy's truck until he showed up, just so they could have that final word. Again, the solo guy started clashing with the group, only to realize there weren't any bouncers to protect him anymore. Next thing he knows, he's banging on a stranger's door, begging for help. When the law showed up, things got real quiet. People scattered, and those who didn't were detained and questioned. Dad and I didn't have to give a statement, and since I wasn't the one who called the police, we just shut the door and got back in bed. The only person that must have got arrested was that roadway worker. His truck was still in the parking lot the next morning when we left.
At the time of writing this story, I'm 21 years old. I'm a female and I grew up in Ohio. This was one of the scariest nights of my life, and I'm still afraid to drive alone at night. At the time of this story, I was moving from a very well-known suburb outside of a main city to a small farming town with my family. My parents have never been the city type. They had both grown up on farms in the South, and our whole family have lived in similar areas until I was about to enter high school. So you can understand how itchy they were to get back to their roots. I am the youngest of 4. I have 3 older brothers, and I was the last to graduate. So the summer after my senior year, my parents decided this was a good opportunity for a change in scenery, since I was no longer tied down to a school district. The town that we were moving to was only around 45 minutes away. And instead of moving everything all at once and overwhelming ourselves, my parents opted to have us move our things every few days for around 2 or 3 weeks, in the hopes that it would be easier for us to settle into the new house. The majority of the drive between the 2 towns is through main highways, and was pretty much a straight shot. That's why this night was so terrifying, because I had made this drive nearly 50 times before this. I was too comfortable, and I allowed myself to let my guard down. I'm a pretty small girl, around 5'3" and about 140 pounds. And even though my dad had taught me self-defense when I was younger, I'm the kind of person who freezes during confrontation or when I'm under pressure. It's very annoying. So it's a miracle I made it out of this alive. One night I decided to visit some old friends from the neighborhood that we were moving from. I would stop by on my way back to our new house. I can't exactly remember what time it was. I'm thinking it was around 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Regardless, it was already very dark outside. Now, even though Ohio is a northern state with pretty severe winters, in recent years the summers have been sweltering, even at night. I can also get a bit car sick in the heat with all the muggy air getting trapped in the car. At the time, my car's AC was malfunctioning, so I usually drove home with my windows down. As I said, it was pretty late. There weren't really any other cars on the road with me. I'd seen about 10 cars during the entire drive. When I was just over halfway on the second main highway, There was an intersection with a gas station on my right, and nothing but a river and bridge on the left. It was a 4-lane highway, and I was driving down the far right lane because of a turn that I had to make further up the road. This may seem like useless information, but it will be important later on. Nothing felt off initially. As I said before, I had made this trip several times before. I pulled up to a red light at this intersection, and I was playing some pop-punk music with my left arm out of the driver's side window when another car pulled up into the left lane next to me. Looking back now, it may have been a Dodge Charger, because I do remember it was a bright orange with a thick black stripe across the top of it. I was singing along to whatever song I had on at the time when I heard talking next to me. It wasn't so much that I heard them talking specifically about me or anything, but they were being quite loud, and I have ADHD, so the extra noise made me turn my head. I regretted it immediately, because when I looked at the source of the noise, I saw a man sticking his head out of the passenger side window, staring directly at me and smiling. The look in his eyes made me want to vomit. Apparently he had been talking to me. I turned back quickly, knowing that if I kept eye contact any longer, he might think that I would be interested in chatting. I then heard the sound of a hand hitting a car door. Obviously, one of the men were trying to get my attention. In the middle of all this, the front passenger started to whistle. You know, that signature cat call whistle that a lot of girls get just walking down the street. I started getting angry because I wasn't a f***ing dog, but I kept my gaze forward, praying for the light to change so I could get away from these creeps. Now I know this sounds ridiculous that we were still sitting at this red light, but this particular traffic light had those really old and light sensors, the ones that you have to back up and pull forward just to set off again. I didn't give these men any indication that I wanted to talk to them, but apparently this gave them more incentive to continue trying to get me to look at them. The front passenger and 2 other voices piped up.
Hey baby, you want a ride? Why don't you hop in? We'll show you a good time tonight. Meet us at the gas station. We're not going to hurt you. Hey, why don't you talk to us? We just want to get to know you.
I had heard enough, so I rolled up my window and locked the doors of my car. Well, this apparently pissed off the front passenger, because before the window was up, I heard him shout, before swinging his car door open. Before I knew it, he had gotten out of his car and walked over to the passenger door behind me, trying to pull on it. This is why explaining the specifics of my location was so important. I was basically trapped, because if I had tried to get out and go run to the gas station, or God forbid I had to run and cross the bridge on my left, I would have had to pass this other car and the man outside to get there. Obviously, getting out of the car and running would not be my best bet here, but at this point I was so terrified, and I was trying to weigh all my options. Looking back, I now know this would have been a good time to get the fuck out of there, but I was literally paralyzed in fear. Again, confrontation freaks me out. I couldn't even feel my feet to hit the gas, and my hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard, I couldn't even feel them either. The man quickly realized that he wasn't able to get in, and walked up to my window and began smacking it with his open palm. He was hitting it so hard that I actually thought I heard the glass creaking, like it was going to shatter at any moment. When I still would not look over at him, he stopped hitting the glass just long enough to spit all over the window. I have no idea what gave me strength. Perhaps it was the fact that there was a chance he would have broken the glass and forced his way inside. But right as he lifted his arm again, and what looked like him about to drive his elbow into my window, running the red light and definitely exceeding the speed limit to get the hell out of there. I don't know what made me look back, but when I glanced up at my rearview mirror, I saw that all 3 of the men were now standing outside of the car. I saw one of them holding a small object. To be honest, I don't even want to think about what it might have been. I almost threw up from the anxiety and pretty much cried the rest of the way home. My parents own a restaurant in the area and are usually working very late, so when I got back home, only one of my older brothers was there. He did his best to try and calm me down, but I don't think I slept at all that night. I know the fear was irrational because the men had not followed me home, but even so, I still locked my bedroom door just to make me feel a bit safer. I regret not being able to get a license plate, but as you might understand, I was so shaken up and just wanted to get out of there. I have never had an encounter like that again in that area, but granted I found an alternate route through some side streets, so I usually avoid that highway altogether. This is a story that my dad has shared with me. He grew up in a small town called Stowe in Ohio with his parents and older sister. Across the street there was a boy named Richard. He was around the same age as my father. He described him as a scrawny, red-headed troublemaker. He would spit on people as they walked by, and even set a house on fire in the neighborhood, then blamed it on a kid who had special needs. Nothing he did as a child, however, would compare to the crimes he committed when he was only 19 years old. My dad had just started his sophomore year of college when he heard the news. Richard and his friends, Clinton and Kenneth, were throwing rocks off of a local bridge onto the interstate below when one of them struck a vehicle of 21-year-old Wendy Alferendo. Her friend, 20-year-old Dawn McCreary, was also in the car. They were sorority sisters who had just gotten off of work. At this time, Kenneth decided that he had enough and went home. This is when Richard and Clinton came up with their evil plan. Both of the young men approached the girls, offering them help and to give them a ride. They drove the girls to a nearby shopping center where they would call their parents. However, Richard and Clinton tied the girls' hands together and drove them to a field behind the mall where they were assaulted and tortured for 3 grueling hours. They would abandon their bodies in that field. They then decided they wanted to sell the girls' clothing and jewelry to make some extra cash. When Richard couldn't find a buyer for the items, he burned them in his backyard, which woke my grandparents. My grandfather called the police to report what he thought was yet another neighborhood disturbance from Richard. The police gathered the evidence, and after locating Wendy's abandoned car, they arrested Richard and began the investigation. Both Richard and Clinton were arrested and charged with the murders. They found the knife that was used in the homicide in Clinton's pocket when he was arrested, and some of the burnt items still had traces of the victim's DNA. Since Clinton was only 17, he was spared the death penalty and is currently serving life in prison. Richard, however, was given the death sentence. On October 14th, 2003, at 10 a.m., Richard Wade Cooey was executed by lethal injection. Wendy's family was present at his execution. Every time I visit my grandparents' house, I look across the street to where Richard used to live, and I can't help but get the chills. I'm glad I never met Richard, and I'm also glad that my dad was smart enough to stay away from him when he was growing up. For the sake of the story, I'm going to call myself Rodney. This happened in 2011, around February. English is my second language, so please bear with me. For some information, I am a 33-year-old Haitian male living on the outskirts of London. I was 20 at the time, and I was still living with my parents. I was dating my first girlfriend, who I will refer to as Nicole. Nicole was 19, and the first 6 months of the relationship went well, and we had a lot of things in common. Nicole was originally from Martinique, which is a small island in the Caribbean. Many of the population there speak French, and so do I. She lived with her older brother and 2 male cousins. I thought I had found the one, but I was sadly mistaken. As our relationship progressed, she became more and more controlling. She would constantly argue with me, and would yell at me if she found out that I had played video games online with my longtime female friends. She even tried to fight one of my female friends because she thought I was cheating on her. My friend got the best of her, of course, and ended up kicking her ass. Eventually I had enough and broke up with her. But things began to happen about a month after our breakup, when I started dating the girl who would eventually become my wife. I'll refer to her as Jennifer. When Nicole found out that I was dating somebody else, she became furious. She started calling my phone multiple times and sending me threatening emails. Her brother also left me some very alarming voicemails. "You scumbag. You're going to suffer for hurting my little sister's feelings. I know where you live, and I'm coming for you." Jennifer was concerned, but I didn't think anything would happen. But again, I was sadly mistaken. One night, both of my parents were out of town, so Jennifer and I were all alone, having a good time. We then heard someone hitting the front door. It wasn't like somebody was knocking. It was like they were trying to break it down.
I told you that I would come for you, didn't I? I'm gonna kill you and that little you're with. You should have never hurt my sister, and now you're going to pay.
I recognized the man's voice right away. It was Nicole's older brother. We ran upstairs to my bedroom, and we soon heard the maniac downstairs bust open the front door and began to make his way inside. But we also heard other people running into the house, followed by a commotion. We locked ourselves in the bedroom and called the police. They showed up not even a minute later. It turns out that the other people who ran into the house were our next-door neighbors. They saw what was going on and decided to intervene. The police found a huge kitchen knife in his backpack. Both my ex-girlfriend and her older brother were arrested for attempted manslaughter. Now I know what you might be thinking. Attempted manslaughter? The man planned on murdering both of us. But remember, this is the UK. The justice system here is a complete joke. However, Nicole and her deranged brother were deported back to Martinique. But there's just one problem with this. Martinique is a French territory, so they can easily travel back to France, then sneak back into London from there. Jennifer and I have moved on with our lives and are now married. I just hope that Nicole and her psycho brother don't try to hunt us down again. I am a 27-year-old male. I spent about a year in San Francisco as part of a job. Although I enjoy living in the Bay Area very much, the extremely high cost of living there and the distance from friends and family was too difficult for long-term stability. As such, I was eager to return to my home state of Louisiana. I ended up finding a job near my hometown that was a much better fit for me and was closer to my family. After resigning from my position, I quickly packed my belongings into my car and began the 2,000-mile journey back home. Given that I had very long workdays, I had no time to explore the beautiful state of California while I was living there. Therefore, I decided to fully enjoy myself and visit some nice places along the way. I met up with friends in SoCal and visited the beaches in Los Angeles and San Diego. After a few days, I resumed my journey. I stopped at a rest area in Arizona to refill my gas tank and grab some lunch. While walking back from the restroom, I noticed a beat-up old van in the parking lot. It was white and had red and blue streaks. I saw a man sitting in the driver's seat, smoking a cigarette. He looked like the kind of person that panhandles outside of a gas station. As I walked by, the man smiled and waved at me. I immediately felt a deep discomfort in my chest that spread to my gut. I gave him a quick nod and carried on, then promptly got into my car and drove off. I stopped at a hotel in Tucson for the night. After checking in, I went back to my car to retrieve some things. I immediately noticed a beat-up van in the parking lot in front of the hotel. It looked just like the van from the rest area. At first, I brushed it off as just another creepy old van, but I recognized the red and blue paint streaks on the side. This design didn't look like it was on purpose, more like it was parked next to some half-assed painters, so this was definitely the same van I saw at the rest area. I figured maybe it was some bizarre coincidence, and the man was heading in the same direction I was. I quickly retreated to my hotel room for the night. The following morning, once I got to my car, I looked at the front parking lot. The van was no longer there. I was relieved and resumed my journey. I decided to make a stop in Albuquerque to do some exploring. There was a festival taking place in the downtown area. I walked around and enjoyed the live music. As I stood in line at one of the food trucks, I started to experience that weird sensation when you're in danger, and immediately saw a man about 200 feet away from me, staring. He was standing beside a tree, smoking a cigarette. It was the same man from the rest area. I decided to walk towards him to get a better look, and he quickly disappeared into the crowd. I was shocked. This was no longer a coincidence. This man was following me. I quickly returned to my car and drove off. I then called my parents while I was on the highway. I told them about the man who was following me. My dad just brushed it off and said, "You know, a lot of people are traveling on the same roads and stopping in the same cities along the way. I think you're just being paranoid." My mom, on the other hand, seemed a bit more concerned. "Please be aware of your surroundings and make sure you're keeping your phone charged." They both advised me to stop at my brother's house in Dallas rather than drive straight to Louisiana. I drove for 6 more hours. Once it became dark, I decided to pull over at a rest area along a country road. I was exhausted and needed a break. The rest area was very remote and had very little lighting. I literally passed out on my steering wheel once I was parked. I was woken up by a very loud knock at the driver's side window. I turned to my left and saw someone standing outside. It was dark, and I couldn't see who the person was at first. I turned on the dome lights, and I immediately recognized the person. I then saw a beat-up white van parked right next to my car. My heart began racing. The man grinned at me and signaled for me to roll down my window. "I need some help. Roll down your window. Now." Again, I shook my head and said no. He immediately became upset and began pounding on my window. The man then attempted to open my door, but luckily, I kept all my car doors locked. He then pulled out a knife and hissed, "Open your damn door." I started my engine and put my car into reverse. He began running after my car with a knife in his hand. I couldn't stop hyperventilating. I was on the verge of a panic attack. But I drove out of the rest area and continued down the highway. I called up my parents again and informed them about what just happened. They were shocked. No one could dismiss this as a coincidence now. They believed it would be worthwhile to call the police, but that it might be difficult for them to really do anything about it, as the rest area was in the middle of nowhere, and it was unlikely that there were any cameras in the parking lot. I was about 5 hours from my brother's house. My parents encouraged me to stop at the nearest big city, which was about an hour away, and stay at a hotel for the night. I ended up contacting the police the very next day and filed a report. I provided the rest stop's location and a description of the van. The officer forwarded that information to the highway patrol, but as expected, they couldn't do anything about it. The man was probably miles away by that point. I was strongly encouraged to stay off the country roads and avoid driving at night. I eventually made it to Dallas and told my brother and my sister-in-law about what was happening. My brother, being the true gun-loving Texan he is, said that he would have his firearms ready, just in case something happened. I spent about a week in Dallas, and then drove back home to Louisiana.
This is a story that was told to me by my aunt that gave me the chills. Back in the 90s when she was in college, she worked at Burger King for one summer. She told me that one night, when she was at work, it was a really quiet night and it was pretty late, so it was just her and a few other employees working at the time. My aunt needed to go back to a storage closet they had to get something, but when she opened the door, she saw a man sitting inside the closet. She screamed and ran away to get another worker. When they both came back to the closet and opened it, the man was gone. They had no idea how he could have gotten out without being seen. Then, a few weeks later, while working another late-night shift, my aunt was by herself working the cash register. The restaurant was completely empty, except for a man sitting by himself in the corner. After a few minutes and getting several looks at him, my aunt recognized him to be the same man that was hiding in the closet from before. She wasn't sure what to do. The man was just sitting there in the corner by himself. He didn't order anything, and he wasn't really doing anything either. He was just sitting there. She couldn't help but feel a little bit nervous. My aunt ended up going back to tell one of her coworkers who she was friends with. But when they both came back, once again, the man was gone. It was a weird experience, and my aunt only worked at the Burger King for that one summer. Not long after, she quit working there, but she learned about the history of that Burger King from her friend later on. It used to be a different restaurant, but that restaurant was closed after a man had died inside the restaurant in a robbery. When she saw the man's photo, he looked exactly like the one she had seen. The restaurant was abandoned for about a year before Burger King took it over 5 years before my aunt worked there. It's a pretty creepy story. I work at McDonald's, as I'm a high school student and just turned 16, so it's a decent first job for me. About a month ago, I was working in the drive-thru taking people's orders. It was a Friday night, and things were finally quieting down at about 10 p.m. A car pulled up to the drive-thru, and I began to take their order. After I spoke and asked them what they would like, they didn't respond. It was just silence for a few seconds. I repeated myself. The person responded by saying my name. And not just my first name, but my full name. First, middle, and last. I realized it must be someone that I knew, but I didn't recognize the voice or the person. I was confused. I asked who it was. They didn't answer. They just repeated my name one more time. They then drove off. It was a man wearing sunglasses. I didn't recognize him at all. I was pretty spooked for the rest of my shift. After I got off, I went home and told my parents. They were just as confused as I was. To this day, I don't know who it was, and every time I think about it, it creeps me out. This happened almost 3 years ago now. I was driving back with my friend from college. It was kind of late at night, and we were both super hungry. We saw an exit and took it. When we did, we saw that the only open restaurant there was Arby's. Their drive-thru was out of order, so we both walked inside. The place was very quiet, and we appeared to be the only customers. We ordered and then stood by waiting for our food. As we were waiting, we saw the door open and a man walk in. He looked to be middle-aged and was rather tall and large. He had glasses and sort of long hair as well. He walked in slowly and looked at us as he did. Then he walked over and sat down at one of the tables in the restaurant. As we waited, I could feel the eyes of the man locking on to us. My friend and I would both glance over occasionally to see him staring. It was rather uncomfortable. Finally, our food was done, and they gave it to us. We took it and walked out of the restaurant. As we walked out and went back to my car, I noticed the man was parked directly next to us. At least, I assumed that it was the man's car because there were only 2 other cars in the entire parking lot. Then, I noticed the man exiting the restaurant and walking towards us. He was giving off a really creepy feeling to my friend and I, so we quickly got in my car. We had planned to eat in the parking lot and then drive back, but with the man parked next to us, he got in his car and then began to stare at us once again through the windows of our cars. It was really creepy, so I decided to just drive away. But just as I was afraid of, as soon as I started up my engine, the man started up his as well. And when I started driving away, he followed. I merged back onto the freeway that we had been on before. It was pretty late, so not too many cars were out there besides us. As we started to speed up through the freeway, the guy in the car behind us went from following us to aggressively tailing us. He drove right up to the bumper of my car and followed extremely close. He was so close that I thought he was going to hit the back of my car. I sped up, but at the same time, I knew the potential danger we were in. My heart started to race and I began sweating. The guy behind us then changed lanes and started driving beside us. I slowed down to let him pass. When I did, he slowed down to the same speed. But as his car got next to mine, I looked over and saw him staring at me with a deranged smile on his face. Then he turned his car right towards ours. I had to swerve onto the shoulder of the freeway and slam on my brakes to avoid him hitting me. He ended up swerving too far and then spinning his car out. As it did, he went off the road and his car went down into the ditch. We slowly drove by as we saw him try to drive out of the ditch, but appeared to get stuck. I was relieved and I didn't want to stay there, so I elected to drive away, but as I did, my friend called the police. We explained the situation, and they said they would have people in the area shortly. I was able to make it home safely, thankfully, but it was a close call and something I will never forget. This happened to me about a year ago. I was hanging out with some of my friends from high school. One of them worked at McDonald's, and we stopped by because he wanted to say hi to one of his coworkers. There were 4 of us, and it was about 10 or 11 o'clock at night. Our friend went inside, and the 3 of us chilled outside because it was a nice night. I don't think there were any customers at the time, besides us, but after a minute or so we noticed a man riding a 3-wheeled bike around the corner. He had a speaker attached to the back of his bike, which was playing music. We all watched as he rode by us and around the parking lot. He started riding laps around the restaurant. My friends and I thought this was funny and made a couple jokes about it. After about 10 laps, he rode up to us and stopped. He had long hair and a slight beard. He was wearing baggy clothes and appeared to be in his late 20s. He stopped his bike about 5 feet away from us and turned down his music. We all looked at him. "You guys want to know something?" he said. "Sure," I said. He responded with, "I'm about to rob this place." We all looked at each other confused. One of my friends laughed a little. We figured he was joking, but it was kind of a weird thing to say. He just stared at us with a slight grin on his face for a couple seconds. I turned and looked and saw my friend was still talking to his coworker friend at the counter. I kinda wanted to leave. Finally, the man spoke again. "I'd get out of here if I was you guys," he said. "Why's that?" my friend asked. The man said to just leave. My friend said no. I was surprised, but I realized there were 4 of us and 1 of him, and he wasn't any bigger than any of us. The man stood there next to his bike for about 30 seconds just staring at us. Finally, he got back on his bike and rode off. We felt tough for possibly preventing a robbery, as much as we didn't know how serious the man was, or if he was on drugs or something. We all went home, and the next morning I woke up to see my friend post in our group chat a link to a news story. It was about a local bank that had been broken into the previous night. A rock was thrown through the window, and a man was arrested inside. It was the same man. I used to work pretty late nights at one of the jobs I had a few years ago. I remember one night after work, I was especially hungry and wanted to get some food on the way home. It was after midnight though, so I knew I didn't have many options. Of course, as I was driving down the road, I saw a Taco Bell sign, and I knew they were usually open late, so I decided to stop there. I was not all that familiar with the area, because I only lived in that city for the job I had, and I was from another state entirely. As I pulled into the Taco Bell parking lot, I could see that it seemed a little outdated and run down. There was also nobody else there, but that wasn't all too strange with it being so late. The area did look pretty run down, and it was a little sketchy, but I didn't care. I was just really hungry. I pulled into the drive-thru. It took a while for the person to ask me what I wanted, but when they finally did, I ordered 2 beef burritos. I pulled around to the next window and paid. The worker said the food would be out shortly, and then walked away from the window. Once they walked away, it took a really long time for them to come back. I sat there waiting for about 5 minutes. I wondered why it would be taking so long, because nobody else was here, and I had ordered one of the most common things on the menu. Still, I wasn't going to complain as long as I got my food. But then, out of nowhere, I felt the back passenger side door to my car try to be opened. I was driving an SUV, but thankfully my back doors were locked. I looked but couldn't see anybody. They must have quickly hid behind my car at an angle I couldn't see. Then I heard someone kick the back of my car. As they kicked it, I looked again and saw somebody duck down behind the back of my car. Then, I started to see a man running out of a bush on the edge of the parking lot of the Taco Bell. He was running straight for my car and appeared to be wearing a ski mask covering his whole head. I didn't waste a moment and quickly hit the gas pedal and sped away. I could see him and another man running after me in my rearview mirror as I sped off. I left the area quickly and ended up driving home without getting any food. I reported the incident, but I never stopped at that Taco Bell again. This happened to me last year. I was hungry after a late night shift at work. It was past midnight, so I knew I didn't have many options. I saw a McDonald's and pulled off the highway to go there. McDonald's hours vary depending on the location, so I was hoping they would be open. However, the lights were fairly dim, so I wasn't quite sure. I decided to pull into the drive-thru to see. When I pulled up to the speaker, I heard a voice say, "Hi, welcome to McDonald's. What can I get you today?" I said I would have the number 9, and that was all. They said sure and to pull up to the first window. So I pulled my car around. However, when I reached the window, nobody came to it. I saw the kitchen lights appeared to be all dimmed as if they were closed. I waited there for a couple minutes. I knew I was the only customer, so I didn't know what was taking them so long. After another minute went by, I didn't see any movement at all. I took out my phone and searched McDonald's on Google Maps. The location came up, and when I looked, it said it was closed. I was confused and kept staring at my screen, wondering if this was a mistake. Just then, I saw somebody finally appear at the window out of the corner of my eye. It was a man in all black with a hood covering most of his face. As soon as I turned my head, he ducked down. I drove off as fast as I could and went straight home. I don't know who that was or what happened, but I do know I won't go back to that McDonald's. When I was in college, I worked at McDonald's during the summer. One day, I was working on a Saturday, and I was behind the counter taking people's orders. It was going pretty well for a weekend, until a man came up and asked for 2 Big Macs. I put in the order, he paid, and I gave him his receipt. I then helped the next person in line. About a minute later, he came back up and said he was charged for 2 Big Macs, but he only wanted 1. I told him he ordered 2, because I know I heard him say 2 Big Macs. He got angry when I said that, and said, "Don't put words in my mouth, I know what I said." "I'm sorry, sir, I wasn't trying to," I said. He then told me not to get smart with him. I could tell he was a short-tempered man. I apologized again and offered to give him money back for a Big Mac and only give him the one, but he said he didn't want that anymore. He then started saying that I should be fired. I told him to calm down, but that didn't work. He started raising his voice, and everybody in the restaurant was beginning to notice. One of my coworkers, Jack, came up and started talking to the man. After a brief conversation with Jack, he said he didn't want anything and he just wanted to leave. We gave him his money, and I thought the situation was over. That is, until he leaned in over the counter and said to me, "When you get off, I'll be waiting for you." I didn't know whether to take this as a joke or not, but clearly the man had issues if he was going to make a scene over an extra Big Mac. I didn't say anything, and he turned and walked out. I wasn't too concerned with his threat at all, because I was only an hour into my 8-hour shift. I knew there's no way a man was going to wait around that long, and I didn't think he would actually do that at all. I worked the rest of my shift, which went by relatively well. In fact, by the time I was done, I had forgotten all about the incident. It was 10 p.m. when I was off, so I got my things and headed out to my car. As I approached my car, I saw a car at the other end of the parking lot's doors swing open. Sure enough, out walked the man from earlier. I couldn't believe he actually waited for me. I sprinted for my car and he chased after me. I almost made it to my door when he grabbed my arm. He started to pull me away from my car, and that's when I screamed like a little girl. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my pepper spray and sprayed it everywhere. Eventually it got his face in the struggle and he let go of me and ran away. I accidentally sprayed myself in the face as well, but I was able to get into my car and lock the door with my eyes burning. It didn't get me too bad and I was able to regain my composure after a couple minutes. I saw 2 people walking towards my car in concern. They asked me if I was okay and if they should call the police. I said yes, and the police arrived shortly after and took down my information. Unfortunately, the man got away, but I just feel lucky that he didn't hurt me. It still blows my mind to think that he waited around 7 hours to confront me.
Ever since I first went to Chick-fil-A, it's been one of my favorite restaurants. I've always loved their chicken sandwiches, and their sauce always hits the spot. However, the college that I recently graduated from is in an area where there's no Chick-fil-A nearby, so when I was at school, I could never have it. Last year, when the semester finally came to an end, I was driving back home to get to my parents' house, and I had the idea to get Chick-fil-A. I left my school in the morning, and it was a 4-hour drive to get back home. When I got about an hour away from home, my cravings got the better of me, and I saw a Chick-fil-A and stopped. It was a Chick-fil-A that I had never been to before, but it looked relatively new and was very busy. I got in the drive-thru line, which was long but moving fast. I ordered the number 1, which is what I usually got, of a chicken sandwich, fries, and a drink. I was so hungry that I decided to park and eat it there. The Chick-fil-A was in a large shopping area that had a mall with a really big parking lot connected to it, so I drove to an open area of the mall parking lot that wasn't very busy. I started to eat, but before long I was kind of annoyed with the way that the sun was shining right into my front window onto me. I moved parking spaces down to where there was a shady spot near a tree. As I backed up my car out of the spot and started to drive, I saw that there was another car that was parked a little ways away from me that started to leave at the same time. I drove over and parked next to a tree, and the car followed me and parked about 10 spots away from me. I found it odd, but overall was more focused on eating. A while later, when I decided to continue with my drive home, I had forgotten all about the car and started to drive away. But when I did, I noticed the car start to drive with me. I never bothered to look to see who was driving it, and it was too far away to tell by this point. I once again found it odd, but what could I do? I got back on the road and then merged onto the freeway that was close by. I noticed the entire time that the car that was seemingly following me did the same. I got kind of worried when I saw this. I wondered why someone would follow me. Had I accidentally cut him off or something before? I kept on driving down the road and the car remained behind me the entire time. I tried some things like slowing down or changing lanes, but he kept following me. I still couldn't really tell much about how the driver looked because I still wasn't able to get a very good look at him. The closer I got to home, the more concerned I became because I didn't want to go all the way home and have this guy potentially know where I live. When I got about 10 minutes away from home,
I decided to pull off the highway again and take the exit. I didn't really have much of a plan, but I knew I shouldn't go to my house with somebody following me. There was a little town that had a few stores and gas stations. I pulled into the parking lot of a supermarket and parked in a spot in the back where there weren't many other cars. Of course, the car that was following me did as well. I got out my phone and called my parents. I was going to tell them that I had been followed and ask them what to do. But before I could finish telling them, I saw that the car had parked in a spot behind me and a few spaces to the left. I noticed that the driver's door of the car opened, and both passengers' doors in the back did as well. I saw 3 large men all get out of the car and start heading towards me. In this moment, as they approached my car, I panicked and slammed my foot on the gas pedal and sped away. I saw the men then stop and begin to run back to their car. This is where I got lucky in a way. There happened to be a police car that was driving on the quiet road connecting the supermarket with other businesses. When he saw me speeding away in an almost reckless way, he pulled me over. The car that was following me slowed down too, but then drove away. When the officer got to my window, he told me I was driving a little wild, and I told him my situation. He then gave me just a warning to slow down and drive safer, and offered to drive behind me for a few miles to make sure that I wasn't followed. I took him up on the offer, and luckily I was able to make it home safely without ever seeing that car again. This story happened about a year ago. I was at Chick-fil-A with my girlfriend one night. It was one of both of our favorite restaurants, and we would get it all the time. Usually we would go through the drive-thru, but tonight we decided to eat inside the restaurant. It was a little bit later at night, and not very many other people were there at all. We sat in a booth on the far side of the restaurant, and were all by ourselves for the most part. We were eating, joking around, and just having normal conversation, when all of a sudden I heard a banging at the window right in front of me. We were sitting by the window, so I was super startled. Because it was dark out and the way the window was, I couldn't really see out of it very well at first, but when I looked, I saw a man. There was a guy who looked pretty mean. He was angrily banging on the glass right in front of us. My girlfriend and I were both pretty startled, and we watched the man to see what his problem was. He started to yell something at us, but I couldn't understand what he was yelling. The man wore a dark sweatshirt with the hood up and appeared to wear glasses and have a brown goatee. I don't know if he was insane or what, because I certainly hadn't done anything to make him angry. The man then suddenly stopped yelling and turned his back on us, then sprinted away into the night. My girlfriend and I both looked at each other in shock. "What was that?" she asked. I figured the guy was insane or on drugs or something like that, but we were both just glad that he was gone. Like many Chick-fil-A's, it was next to multiple businesses, so we figured he had come from one of those. We both talked about it for a few minutes, and then were ready to go back home. I had to use the bathroom, so I told my girlfriend that I would be right back and then we would leave. I walked inside the bathroom and to the urinal and did my business. As I was in there, though, I remember seeing someone was using one of the stalls in the men's room. When I was done, I got to the sink and began washing my hands, when I heard the stall door start to open. I casually looked over to see who was coming out. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw the same man who had been outside. He stopped in his place and just stared at me. Then, slowly, a really wide and creepy grin came over his face. I didn't waste any time and quickly left the bathroom as fast as I could. I saw my girlfriend was waiting for me by the door, and she could see the panic on my face. She asked me what was wrong, and I just told her we had to go. I didn't pay any attention to if the man followed us or not. When we got to the car, I told my girlfriend about how I had seen the man in the bathroom. She was really shocked to hear this, and we drove home after that. Thankfully, we never saw the man again. What was the most crazy thing is that we had a view of the only entrance to the restaurant the entire time, and we never saw the man come inside the door. I don't know how he was suddenly inside the bathroom, but thinking about it gives me the creeps.
When I was younger and more inclined to chase paper at literally all hours of the night, I took a side gig as an Uber driver. This was on top of my full-time job in retail. Working a counter and making sales just didn't have the payout that I needed at the time. And I wasn't smart enough to just find a better job or simply negotiate a raise. Instead, I did what so many of our working youth do today and picked up a second job. I lived in this big city, drove a nicer car that I loved zipping around in, so working Uber made a lot of sense in my mind. This was around 10 years ago, so the company had successfully launched and was making waves all over the country. You'd hear about people clearing six-figure salaries, all just from giving people rides around their community. People I'd talked to, just in passing, all told me the same thing. It was easy money that you could make hand over fist. I can't really tell you that it wasn't that. I pulled a decent amount in this little side hustle, but I wasn't doubling my income like I thought I would. It also put me in this new level of exhaustion because I had to sacrifice sleep in order to have more productive Uber shifts. This meant I was going all the time. I'd get off the retail job around 5 p.m., grab a quick bite to eat, and then off to work Uber until about 2 in the morning. Anything after that time, I quickly learned was just riffraff. And this was back when Uber didn't have quite the protocol that it does now. It wasn't unheard of for some pretty wild stuff to happen in the backseat of these cars. Fast forward a little bit, and I'm like 6 months into this new working world. I've gotten the swing of working double shifts, where the higher yield areas are for pickups, and how to make a quick turnaround in both drop-offs and getting back down to the downtown areas. If you took the wrong road, you'd come up on the opposite side, where a lot of commercial and business parks were. You'd have to make these weird loops that took extra time and gas to do so. There was a hospital downtown that I would periodically idle nearby, as it had serious real estate in the form of parking lots. I could just rest here and check my phone, not have to worry about the hustle and bustle of traffic, even catch a few Z's if I needed to. There were also various fast food joints and convenience stores nearby, everything to keep me in the game. Occasionally, I'd drink a Red Bull or something, but it wasn't that often. Alas, I found myself at the end of an exhaustive cycle. I was definitely about to reach my limit. One night, during that red line period, I did my usual routine where I pulled into the hospital while waiting for a client. It was an unusually slow night, and I was expecting lots of passengers, so I didn't really know what to do. I held out that I'd make more money later on in that night, so went and got an energy drink from a vending machine in the lobby. It didn't matter. I plopped back down in the driver's seat, turned on my favorite playlist, and then passed out just right there. I wasn't asleep for very long, but it was a deep, catatonic rest. You know the one. Mouth wide open, drooling, mouth breathing, looking my absolute worst. There is one thing that I dislike more, and that's the feeling of waking up when I shouldn't have been asleep. My brain starts to immediately overcompensate. I can't make any connections despite all the sparks. I can't remember where I am, who I am, what I'm doing. There are times when teachers would catch me sleeping in high school. I'd be so startled when they woke me up. I couldn't even speak proper English. Just make weird noises and get silent, then literally have to remember how to make it all make sense. It was one of those times. I remember kicking myself awake because my head was at this weird, funny angle. I made this kind of groaning sound as I snapped back into the waking world. I was still inside my car. It was still nighttime. Hell, it was the same playlist coming through the speakers. I peeked up at the clock and saw that I was only out for maybe 15 minutes. I took a deep breath through my nose and then settled into the seat. A cat nap was actually perfect, allegedly giving us more energy than a longer nap. I checked my phone and saw that I didn't miss anything, but there was a person that I could swoop up nearby and make a few bucks off. I took another swig of my drink, checked my mirrors, and then went to shift into park. I stopped though. There was something off in my rearview mirror. If I wasn't mistaken, there was a person sitting right behind me in the middle seat. We make eye contact. I whirl around and sure enough, plain as day, there's a man just sitting not 12 inches from me. He gets a little smile across his face and just kind of nods, like he was acknowledging that I'd been asleep. It almost looked like a little hello on his end. I really didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to start screaming at him to get out. Another part of me wanted to put on this front, act real tough, and then the other part of me just wanted to ask what he was doing inside my car. That's when I looked down and saw the Uber app open in his phone. I remember the sticker in my window that I was parked outside of a hospital. This guy probably exited one of these buildings, was wandering to a through street while he booked a ride. Then he just happened to see me. For whatever reason, seeing his phone helped my brain regain just a little coherence. That put the panic to rest. So I simply said, "Hi, what are you doing in my car?" He didn't respond for a moment, just kind of looked at the floor and then the ceiling, anywhere but directly at me. I gestured to his phone, and then continued to talk. "Are you looking for a ride or something?" I asked. He nodded. Okay, he's at least halfway normal. I got on at length for a bit, pulling my seatbelt on. Then I explained to him what I explained to you. I worked 2 jobs, I was tired, and I just happened to fall asleep. I said I'd be happy to give him a ride in exchange for a good review, one that wouldn't say that I was sleeping inside my car. We both shared a laugh on that one. "I'm trying to get downtown," he said. He pointed back Jackson Drive, a main drag through the area. "Where?" I asked. He then gave me these loose directions, but said it was pretty close to an old music venue that had shut down a few years before. I was familiar with that area, so I just started the route. We made a little small talk, mostly about myself and how I'd fallen asleep. This guy's name was Donovan. He said that when he got in the car, he went to speak but saw that I was snoring, so just decided to wait. "Well, I appreciate you not being a weirdo," I said. "I was about to freak out before I saw your Uber app." Then it hits me. This guy and I aren't actually linked up. He never ordered a ride through the app, and I haven't logged picking anyone up. I take a quick glance at him in the rear view and say, "Hey, I just realized this ride isn't registered. Can you find me on the app really quickly?" That's when the guy scoffs, looks out the window and says, "Oh, I'm not paying for this." I laugh, to which he just stays silent. It's getting a little awkward now. I glance into the back real quick, realize the mistake that I've now made. This guy isn't dressed like a professional, no business casual, if you catch my drift. He's filthy, he's got torn up clothes, he's only got one shoe on. His face is dirty and dark from sun exposure. There's this grimy backpack next to him. He's homeless, he has to be. While I was asleep, some drifter hanging around the hospital must have just climbed into my car, thinking he'd be able to sleep in it or something. I noticed it on my second glance though. Donovan is wearing a bracelet, the paper kind that they use in the hospital for discharge. This guy probably OD'd behind a trash can, got Narcaned, and is now getting a free ride back to his crack house. All because I couldn't keep my eyes open. I shake my head, hit my blinker, and then start guiding my car towards the next exit. "Yo, where you going?" he asked from the back. "I told you where we're going." "I'm not driving you across town for free, dude. You're lucky I don't even call the cops," I countered. I took my phone out of the cup holder beside me just to show him that I wasn't messing around. "Yeah," Donovan said. "You're lucky I don't unlace my shoe and strangle you with it." Before I could even blink, I felt his crusty, calloused hands sneak around the headrest and wrap around my throat. Instinctually, I took one hand off the wheel and tried to break his grip, but I couldn't do it. I barely got a finger underneath his palm to create just this little space to breathe. Panic started to set in. As I watched a minute tick by on the clock, I tried to get this guy off of me. I could hear his raspy breath just behind me. The smell coming off his hands and mouth was completely disgusting. This dude definitely hadn't showered in at least a week or more. Then it finally hits me. I had to get him off of me. I check my mirrors and see that I'm alone on this stretch of the highway. I then firmly slam on my brakes. I was belted in, but Donovan behind me wasn't as lucky. He slammed forward, right into my seat, which created a little space in his arms. I yanked with my free hand, broke his grip, and then gunned the car over the shoulder. At this point, Donovan has recovered and is now trying to grab me again, but I'm not letting that happen twice. We're in a bit of a standoff now. I put the car in the park and put the hazards on. I say to hell with it. This has already gone too far. I dial 911, hit the call button, and press the phone to my ear. He starts to trip out, makes a lot more threats, but starts to get out of my car now. That's when I notice he's holding a purse, a pretty nice one at that. He grumbles a little bit, shoulders his backpack in that purse, then steps out into the cool night air. He then proceeds to start walking down the shoulder, down the exit ramp and back into the city. I hear dispatch in my ear and I realize I can't just let this go. I start rattling off everything that just happened to me, where I'm at and where the perp is located. As I'm describing the scene, the dispatcher gets quiet for a second, maybe even mutes me, then comes back with new information just a minute later. She says my report matches an earlier one from that exact hospital that I was parked at. Apparently, old Donovan had been admitted exactly as I figured, and during his stay, he became incoherent, agitated, and realized that he wasn't being supervised. He unhooked himself from the machine, put his clothes back on, then just exited the hospital, but not before stealing a purse out of one of the rooms in his wing. She noticed not long after it went missing and got with hospital security. They got on the cameras. It didn't take very long to see this guy strolling out the front door with that woman's purse in hand. From there, he starts running, as seen on the footage. He was probably paranoid about getting caught now that he'd exited the hospital. He zigzagged through the parking lot for a bit before coming upon my car, which was on and idling. D-bag Donovan thought he was going to be able to steal my car up until he saw me sleeping in it. From there, he just snuck into the back and hid from any potential hospital security. Needless to say, Donovan's night went south after he got out of my car. I told dispatch where I was and where he was headed, and then even followed him down the exit ramp. I didn't make it 2 blocks before a cop swooped in, flashed him with the lights and siren, and threw him in a pair of cuffs. The phone that I'd seen in his hand was the woman's phone. He'd found it in her purse. He was trying to figure out how to order an Uber in the event that I didn't wake up. It just happened to be the perfect guys in the moment. I gave a statement to the officers who hauled him off. I suspected he spent a couple of weeks drying out in a jail cell. I probably don't need to say this, but remember to lock your car doors, people. A year before COVID hit, I got hired at a call center way downtown, like inner city. We worked taking calls for a roadside assistance company that will remain anonymous. Although honestly, the last time I looked them up, I couldn't even find a website for them. They may or may not even be in business anymore. Anyway, because of the nature of our industry, our office operated 24 hours a day. It wasn't this big private call center, but just a ground level corner unit in a commercial office block. We shared a building with 10 or 12 other businesses. All of them would operate during normal hours. At 5 p.m., the whole parking lot cleared out, and the only light on would be coming from our place. It had no signage and a keypad on the door for around-the-clock access. We would trade shifts at 4 p.m., midnight, and 9 a.m., usually in 2-man teams, sometimes 3 or 4 throughout the week or on holiday weekends. The overnight shift was typically just one guy, Benji, but holiday weekends, they'd put 2 of us from midnight to 9 a.m. So there we were. I think it was Labor Day weekend, and it's Benji and I handling the phones on a Friday overnight shift. I didn't ever mind getting these shifts because honestly, I love working with the guy. He was a little older than me and has some of the craziest stories that I've ever heard. He grew up inner city, kind of a criminal, but got cleaned up and was looking to break into the music business. I was into drawing and illustration, and he liked looking at whatever I was working on at the time. We'd just hang out until the sun came up. We'd even troll people on the phone if they were spamming or dodging the line. Looking back now, it was a lot of fun in those dark hours, and a lot of daydreaming. One night we ordered Domino's, split a pizza and some Cinesticks. Legendary meal for a couple of call room guys. Little did I know in my early 20s that I was slowly becoming lactose intolerant, so all of that cheese and butter would send my stomach and my colon into hysterics. We ate around midnight, talked, and then worked until about 1:30 a.m. And then I started catching the gurgles. By 2 a.m., I knew something was about to happen, out of one end or the other. I clued Benji into what was going on so he could watch the phone line for me. I slipped out the door, which was the only way in and out of the office. There was no secondary escape, no back door, just a big panel window in the back. In hindsight, the office almost seemed illegal. Lots of things within the operation were just shady as hell. As you can imagine, because there's so many office units, we also share a single pair of bathrooms. They were on the ground floor, and they were external, as in the doors were open to the public. Everyone who worked there had a key to either open one door or the other. They were all the way down one of these stretch of businesses, about 40 feet, and then around a corner and tucked into a little back nook of a second floor. This kept them out of sight so no randoms or weirdos tried to use them and or vandalize them. I go in, struggling with my unbeknownst to me digestive issues, and then wash up. As I'm looking into the mirror, I hear someone push on the door from the outside. I laugh and yell something out, as I assumed it was Benji just messing with me. There was no response except for a couple of hard whacks against the metal. Weird, but I had been in there forever, so again, I think Benji is just being funny. I open the door. There's no one there. I step out and wander down the little hallway, but instead of continuing on to the office, I hook left and go out to a small secondary parking lot. It's out in the back. It's where the dumpsters are, as well as this little outdoor area. As I step into the parking lot, I hear feet slapping the asphalt, running at me from some direction. Now I know something weird is going on. I turn and bolt back for the office. I'm sprinting and about to fall face first into the cement, but catch myself on the handle just in time. I start to punch in the code and immediately get it wrong. It's flashing red. I have to wait 5 seconds for it to reset. All I can hear is my heart, my breathing, and these flapping feet out there in the dark. I jiggle the handle and scream for Benji. I'm banging on the door. Suddenly I realize I've switched positions. Now it's me outside being the scary, chaotic thing, and I can see him through the blinds looking over his shoulder. He's on the phone, which is flashing red on 3 ports. It apparently picked up while I was handling my business. I turn and start banging on the glass, begging him to get up. I see him hit the hold button, swing the chair around and rush over to the door. He pushes it open, I spill in, and he slams it right shut again. Breathless, I tell him what had just happened to me. I'm expecting Benji to freak out, lock the extra bolt on the door, and tell me to call the police. Nope, the exact opposite happened. He rolls up his sleeves and steps out into the cool night air. The person was lurking around at the end of the building, where it turned for the bathroom nook. They were barefoot, drug-addled, your average homeless fella in our city. I watched from the threshold of the office door as Benji pigeon-chested this guy and gave him the stern "get the hell out of here" stick. And sure enough, got the guy to tuck tail and run. What I perceived as a serial killer, Benji immediately pegged for just a hobo tweaker. Like I said, he was a hard-ass inner-city dude. He had a colorful history, bit of a rap sheet. I was very grateful to have him by my side every time I went down in that office. We ran into that lurking creep a few more times, and honestly, had all kinds of crazy experiences while working there. There was a 7-Eleven right across the street that would get robbed, roadside calls where people were shot, even one of our drivers, and also a time we helped a guy escape a cult compound by towing his car off of their property. I've never told these stories online, so if anyone is interested in them, just leave me a comment. Cheers.
So I've done a lot of driving for a few years now for many different reasons. Sometimes I drive to work and sometimes just to hang out with friends on the weekends. Being 25 years old, of course, I would most of the time go out partying on the weekends, which resulted in me having to drive places. The places I'd go to were mainly bars and clubs, so sometimes I'd end up driving really long distances for that. It was a weekend night, and I was driving home from one of my college friends' parties when I realized that I was low on gas. To be honest, I debated whether to get gas now or wait until tomorrow, but I knew that I'd probably forget. I pulled into one of my local gas stations down the road and filled up my car with a full tank. As I pay, waiting for my car to fill up, I noticed that it's relatively quiet around. This was strange, as this gas station was pretty popular with it being on the corner, especially for a weekend night. Once my car had been filled up, I go inside just to grab a quick snack when I notice a gas station attendant behind the counter. I give him a quick wave and go get a snack where I then bring it to the counter. Right away, I could almost tell that there was something off about this attendant. He didn't look like someone who would work at a gas station at all. What I mean by that is that in my city, gas station employees were required to wear uniforms. This guy wore a black hoodie and some sweatpants. Not wanting to pry and too tired to care, I tell him it was just the snack I wanted. Right away he said $2, not even scanning the item to be sure. I pull out $2 from my wallet and hand it to him, where he just pockets the money. Confused, I tell him to have a nice night while walking out when I hear someone scream, "Help me." That's when I turn to look at the attendant, where he's now pointing a gun at me, telling me to ignore that. Without hesitation, I basically storm out of the gas station, put the pump back, and floor it. All the while, I'm on the phone with the police, explaining what had happened and what gas station I had left from. As it turns out, police ended up going over, but unfortunately, the so-called attendant I saw was long gone. The actual attendant had been tied up behind one of the dumpsters, who was the one I heard screaming for help. He had been shot in the leg and hit in the head with a pipe, leaving him unconscious. This explains why I saw the other man with a gun. God only knows what would have happened had I confronted him or called the police then. However, I have the personality of a wimp at times, so I wasn't about to take him on or do anything stupid. A few weeks later, a couple's car got stolen while getting gas from another station from the next town over. They never got it back, even while looking for it. I'm still not sure if it was the same guy or not, as crime is slightly high around where I live. What I encountered was possibly one of the worst, if not the worst incident around where I live. That gas station had been closed for a good week or so before reopening again. It's been months now, and I'm still not sure if police managed to find whoever did this or if he's still out there. The description I gave wasn't as great, seeing as he had on a hoodie while also wearing a mask. This just goes to show you that even the most innocent places can be dangerous, especially at night. Nowadays, I always carry a pocket knife with me whenever I go out at night, just in case. Me nor my family go to that gas station anymore, due to the sheer paranoia of what happened.